Did everyone hear that?
Yes.
All right, and we all consent. Okay, so welcome to the Lawn Chair Philosophy Foundation's first annual Alternative Pedagogy mini conference. Philosophy is an empowering endeavor, the reflective powers of which ought to offer any practitioner clear avenues of self-exploration, revelation, and communication leading towards practical autonomy, towards wholeness, towards personhood. However, academic philosophy as practiced in the West has developed in such a particularly exclusive manner as to be inaccessible to the general population, especially underrepresented and marginalized groups. Out of reach for those who may benefit deeply from its resources, Western philosophy is exchanged between the same few hands over and over again to the rhythms of its own stagnation. Philosophers and philosophy as a living, breathing organism need to do better for the sake of their diverse surrounding communities, for the sake of philosophy itself. We here at the Lawn Chair Philosophy Foundation have heard this call and adopted an inclusionary mission in response. We warmly welcome you to join us in our first ever Alternative Pedagogy Mini Conference, which will explore ways to expand philosophy's reach and enhance its practice. And we are looking today both within the academy setting and beyond the traditional university academy setting. So first off, we will begin with Dr. Raphael Krutlandau of the University of Pennsylvania. We'll be discussing 2 teaching methods that aim to increase students' curiosity and independence of thought, which is, I think, a wonderful first step to take in offering, a seat at the philosophical table for those who might be nervous or going through trauma or coming from whatever background, accompanied by whatever inhibitions, which might get in the way of participating authentically and organically in the conversation. So I'm super excited to hear what you have to say. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kelly. I couldn't agree more with your description of philosophy as this. Let me see if I got it right. The same people exchanging ideas to the rhythms of its own stagnation, and it's can be exclusionary, and it's upsetting. It's upsetting to realize this. So what can we do? I don't have any solutions. I really have two concrete small suggestions as to ideas you can implement in your classroom, but I'll try to be thinking globally and acting locally. So my talk will try to zoom out to discuss the nature of teaching today in 2020 as I see it, and then given this background and given the challenges I think students and teachers face, what are some concrete suggestions, things you can put into your teaching toolkit now so that we can make incremental progress towards Kelly's vision of a much more inclusive, much more successful enterprise of philosophy. And I'm very inspired by Kelly's approach here. So thank you, Kelly, for inviting me. I thought it would be appropriate to do a land acknowledgement, but what does that look like on Zoom? I wasn't really sure. And there was actually recently a whole Zoom conference about how to do land acknowledgements on Zoom. And one of the ideas they were bouncing around was that people could do an acknowledgement of the ways that land and broadly resources are recruited in sustaining the conversation that we're having right now. So what resources are involved right now in keeping images of our faces flowing smoothly to one another? So maybe you could call this a kind of hang on a second, I'm unable to advance my slide. That's weird. Why can't I advance my own slide? Okay, that seems to kind of work. There we go. So maybe we could do a kind of energy acknowledgement. So what's the climate impact of this very conversation? And I really don't have any idea how to measure that. But one thing we could begin by noting is that we've been given this concept, the cloud, and we're told the cloud is where the data lives and moves about, and that the cloud is mediating our conversation. And this is a deliciously bullshit term. Don't ever say it again. Don't say deliciously bullshit. That's a terrible metaphor. It's a beautiful piece of bullshit, because it makes us think that this whole process is very natural and as unobjectionable as a happy little cloud floating through a blue sky, and makes us feel as though our data is deterritorialized, I guess you could say, that land is not involved. But of course, this is a total lie. Land is very much involved, and there are places in this country where the data is housed. And for example, there's Data Center Valley in Virginia, which has tons of the data centers owned by Google and Amazon. So there are servers implicated in this conversation. The data that is flowing from me to you is, traveling all over the world right now. It's crazy. And just to belabor the point a little bit, I want to give this one example to help orient our thinking about the energy use involved in running video streaming. And I don't know if anyone recognizes this music video. This is, does anyone recognize it? This is a pop culture quiz for philosophers.
Fail.
Okay, so this it's fair enough. This isn't necessarily the most famous moment in it, but this is Despacito, one of the most watched videos on the internet. 6.7 billion views at the moment. Don't worry if you haven't seen it yet. There's still an opportunity for you to see it. And they a couple years ago, Fortune magazine found that in that year there were about 5 billion views of this, or I guess in 2017 and 2018 put together, this video was viewed 5 billion times, and that took up as much energy as 40,000 US homes use in a year. So just think of all the videos we watch, and now imagine a cloud-based culture, which is what we're shifting to, where all of our conversations are mediated through video streaming technology. Imagine the climate impact. Of course, it's good that people are flying less. I guess that's kind of good, but there still is an energy impact. Anyway, so goes my energy acknowledgement. One last thought. I'm going to be using some Google products, and I really like these products, and I use them in my teaching. I think they're so easy to use. But Google is also worth thinking about here. Google has these big data centers in Virginia, and despite what Google says, only about 4% of those are powered by renewable energy. Greenpeace found this out last year. So that data is from last year. I don't know if it's still up to date. Okay, so that said, I want to get into the talk. Let me first say a little bit about why you should listen to me. I'm not really sure you should listen to me, actually. I'm not a professional researcher in education. I am just an academic. I got a PhD in philosophy a few years ago. Some of my research was on the history of philosophy of education, but when I'm thinking about education, I typically think about it as somebody who educates. I just think about it in terms of my weekly practice as an educator. I have been teaching for a few years, first part-time at Penn and then full-time, not in the philosophy department itself, but I teach interdisciplinary courses for Penn. And I team teach these courses. That means that I get to go back to school in a way and be a student again and watch lectures given by my colleagues who are in other disciplines. This means that I get to experience education from both sides of the podium, as it were, and I get to re-experience a little bit of what it's like to watch a lecture. And I've seen some incredible teaching at Penn. So this is sort of fueling my thinking about university education. Here's what I want to do, if I don't run out of time. I want to say a little bit about higher education in this year. I then want to lead us in 2 group activities. And then I'll talk about a couple of teaching tools, which I hope you can put into your quiver. So I thought I'd begin, since we're pointy-headed intellectuals, I thought I'd begin with some quotations about the university that I find really helpful in orienting me in thinking about who I am in this weird institution. And one of them is a quotation which is about the sociologist Bourdieu. This has just got to be one of my favorite things that I've ever read about the university. Bourdieu rejected the idea that becoming a professor is a process of taking flight from the clumsy inheritance of the social world into the crystalline spheres of the ratiocinative one. Bourdieu suggested, often impolitely, that the generative basis for a career in thought was to be found in the lusty drive for the kind of symbolic and cultural capital that would help the thinker and her field achieve a higher status. So in other words, why do people become teachers in universities? Not necessarily because they solely are pursuing the life of their mind, but because they want some kind of recognition or status. They want cultural capital. In other words, the academy functions largely as an apparatus for refining and transmitting the cultural codes that serve the perpetuation of privilege. Professors, as the dominated fraction of the dominant class, are sentries of the class structure. So, wow. So in this part of the quotation, we learn that we're really implicated in something here. So when you start teaching in a university, you're involved in the work of the university, which is in many ways very positive and good. But of course, in many ways, what universities function to do is to preserve inequality. And that's because of the way that cultural capital flows in the university. It flows more smoothly to the privileged. And so the university, despite what it overtly says, in practice and in reality, what it does is it can reinforce and reproduce and reinscribe social inequalities. And we're part of that story. So I think that when we're thinking about what we should be doing in our classroom, this is one thing to keep in mind, that if we're not proactively reckoning with this, then we're going to be implicated in this process of the reproduction of inequality. So that's one thing that orients me in thinking about these issues. Here's another quotation I really like. The previous quotation was about the aspects of university life that we don't necessarily feel or notice, the things that can pass by us unseen. And this quotation is about, instead, what it's like to be in the university, whether you're a student or a teacher. So regarding imposter syndrome, this is a quotation from Douglas Sadao-Aoki, writing in the Harvard Educational Review 20 years ago, but I think it's great. A student or professor who is prey to imposter syndrome is constantly haunted by the fear that she or he is not a real scholar at all, but a fraud in danger of being unmasked. The university is then constituted as a symbolic system that both gives the subject his or her defining place and always threatens to take it away. The academic subject is thereby compelled to act within that system in accordance with its demands to maintain the image of an academic in its institutional gaze. I love this. Perhaps it's a bit of an overstatement, but I think there's got to be some truth to this thought that part of what the university does is that it encourages us to constantly be trying to show off. Both this is true of students and teachers. And it's not necessarily our fault, but we find ourselves in conditions where this is constantly encouraged of us. It's something we get from our training. And this can really make teaching difficult. Teaching is not about the teacher broadcasting her or his brilliance to the students. It is primarily about giving the students an opportunity to develop their own brilliance. But I think that this sociological context that pervades university life colors the classroom and colors the way that students behave in the classroom and affects the way that students and professors relate to one another. I'm hearing a little bit of feedback, and I'm wondering whether, well, maybe the sound is coming out on somebody's computer and then it's getting fed back into it. Oh, it's gone. Great. Okie dokie. Let me then summarize some of the adjectives I would associate with humanities teaching in higher education today. I think that, as has often been said, it's precarious, especially now, when so many colleges and universities may literally go under. I heard recently that it could be up to a third of higher educational institutions may actually go bankrupt because of this crisis. It's that bad. I don't know if it'll get that bad, but it's clearly bad. And so a lot of people are out of work. It's very grade-oriented. It's often centered on the teacher's interests, passions, and mind, and not student-centered. I would say that as humanities teachers, we are, in a word, implicated. We're implicated in processes of oppression. We're implicated in processes of social reproduction. So we've got to deal with that. I think that we're undervalued by ourselves, by our colleagues, by the students, by the parents, by the society at large. And then the final adjective I would include here is that we're suddenly online. So all of these things are affecting the way that I approach, how to teach in the classroom. What do we actually want out of humanities teaching? I've listed a few goals here, and I'll go through them quickly because I want to make time for the activities. But I think that possibly this will be unobjectionable. I think that one of our main goals is to help students develop a kind of autonomy, imaginatively and intellectually, to have a more authentic relationship with knowledge. This is something Kelly was saying. I was really in agreement with that remark. Formal educational institutions can turn the sharing of knowledge a little bit into a game where we're vying for recognition and status. Both the students and the teacher are competing over a kind of cultural capital. How can we topple that and replace it with a scenario where we are joyfully pursuing knowledge and connecting meaningfully with one another? I think that a goal of the humanities is to provide a kind of moral leadership, even if it's just a matter of helping students think for themselves about what it would take to live a good life. I think that we've got to help students see the value of what we do, especially because they are bombarded with a lot of propaganda suggesting that other things are more worthwhile. And so we've got to somehow counter that. And finally, a goal of teaching the humanities is, from the teacher's perspective, to climb or at least survive within the system. That is another goal, I think, that we all have. And we've got to take that into account, too. With all this in mind, what I'd now like to do is turn the thinking over to you. And I'd like you to hop over to this Google Doc. And I'd like you to write 2 or 3 questions. And I'd like your questions to be about any of the themes here mentioned on this slide. So take a few minutes and write a couple of questions into this Google Doc. And let me know if you have any trouble accessing it.
I can't get out of full screen. How do I do that? If I press escape, will that work?
Options next to the green at the top. And then it should be one of the third to last choice, perhaps.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Where would I find this Google Doc?
So if you go to the URL on the slide.
Okay, URL.
Ooh.
I just stopped sharing my screen, but I'll put the prompt in the Google Doc itself.
Are we able to all type at the same time, or is this a one at a time activity?
We can all type at the same time.
Okay. Ooh. So trippy. Oh, one of these themes. I did two. I did two themes.
Overachiever.
I'm so sorry. I did it by accident. Oh no, I tabbed.
We'll allow it. We'll allow it, but just this once, Kelly. Stick to the plan. Conform.
I'm so sorry. Hello. Oh no, goodbye.
I think somebody just joined. Hi, Kristen.
Hi. Can you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool.
Oh,
I'll share my
hello. How are you?
my screen again so you can see.
I'm doing great right now.
Good.
I'm not in a place where I could use my video, but I can definitely turn on my speaker.
Girl, your voice is all we need.
Oh, shucks. So how's it going so far, guys?
Going good. We're engaging in a group activity right now.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I just shared my screen again. I did that so that Kristen can see what we're doing, but sorry if I just messed up everything. Kelly, can you get back to the Google Doc?
I went to the Google Doc. I'm here. Yes.
Okay, great. Kristen, I don't know if you are in a place where you can edit a Google Doc, but if you want to, you can join in.
I am walking, but
Oh,
I will be a quiet spectator.
That's even better.
Are you in moon shoes? We discussed earlier how moon shoes are essential to walking the stress away during this COVID-19.
I'm wearing bright grape colored pants and neon pink shoes. I don't know if that constitutes moon shoes, but they're very fun.
We can make it so.
Excellent. Excellent. Excellent.
Those are like Saturn shoes. It's like it's a sort of like I would say a Zeus outfit. You're like you're way beyond the moon.
A Zeus outfit. That sounds mighty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Way beyond the moon. It's like lyricism. It was beautiful.
Someone's gonna take the recording and like turn it into some kind of mashup, like, piece of electronic music, right? So that could be part of it.
Are you volunteering?
At the very least.
I'm tempted. If I had the skill set.
Do it.
Just trying to be mindful of time. So it's 6:30. Kelly, if I ended at 6:50, should I try to get wrapped up at 10 minutes, 15 minutes?
You ride this out to the end, however long it takes.
Okay.
It's all good.
Okay, this is really, really interesting to learn more about you. All of you. And it's also great that I have to now apologize because I was, I think it must have been clear to you guys that when I was giving this talk, I was sort of assuming higher ed as being central. And I'm so glad that we actually won't be making that assumption and we can broaden our view of everything. So that's really, really great. Okay, I'm gonna now shift us to the second activity. So let me go back to my slide here. And what I have is a questionnaire. So you've provided some questions, and now I've got some questions for you. So please head on over to this link. Hey, Kelly. Kelly?
Huh?
Might you be willing to make me a co-host so that I can do the breakout rooms?
Okay, sure.
Sweet.
How do I do that?
You go to the participants window, which you can find through a button.
Okay.
The button is sort of next to mute.
Oh, yes, here we go.
And then if you hover over my name, you should get a button that says more. And then if you click that,
Make co-host.
there you go.
Yes.
Haha, now I have the power. Oh, yes. The sweet
What have you
power.
done?
A mutiny.
You're still the host.
Whatever.
You're still just a
Hey,
minor
lovely
god.
people.
A minor god in this pantheon.
I may hop off for a little bit, but I'll probably hop back on when I'm back home and in a seated position where I can actually like engage with my camera. So I'm gonna say goodbye for now, but I should be back on later.
Okay, you hop away.
Bye, everybody. Hop
Goodbye.
away. Bye-bye.
In the interest of time, I want to encourage you to see if you can write like a sentence for the open-ended questions and then try to submit in the next couple of minutes. And so then we can get on to the next part where we can talk about these issues together. And don't yet hit submit because I want you to be able to see your answers while you're talking to somebody else. And I'm not sure if you'll be able to see them after you submit. Maybe. But just in case, don't submit.
Okay. I think I did it.
So, okay, what I'm now going to do is I'm going to put everybody into breakout rooms. But how do I do that?
I don't know if co-host can.
Kelly, can you make me the host?
Oh, it came in little bits, and now
I know.
here I am.
I know. This is how, white men, they just get more and more power. This is what Biden did. Just give me more stuff. Like you should definitely,
Goodbye,
not
lawn chair
comply.
philosophy. I'm no longer.
I am the host. I promise I'll give you the hostship back. I just want to set up the breakout rooms. Actually, you know what? What am I saying? Because there's only 4 of us. So let's just have a conversation in this room. Okay, so never mind. and I'll just make Kelly the host now.
Oh, that felt an
There we go.
eternity.
I know. I know that was uncomfortable, but I think teaching is about knowing how to give up that authority.
Didn't like that group assignment.
Well, okay, so I invite you to, if we were in person, I would say turn to your neighbor and have a conversation about what you wrote on the questionnaire. Since we're in here, we turn to the other people in the room and, let's have a conversation or a debate about what you think here. Why don't we have either Nathan or Emma kick off the conversation?
Do you want to go first?
Do we have to go down the list in order, or can I start with my diatribe about grading?
Oh my God, yes, I want your diatribe.
It's not much of a diatribe. I'm not someone who argues a lot, but I am someone who just eats up airtime. So I am an elementary educator, and we switched to standards-based grading, which is the most wonderful thing in the world because you can accurately measure against something concrete, and instead of giving letter grades, you're just saying they either know this or they don't, and there's no the value of an A, a B, a C, or D, or whatever is not so shockingly horrible. But what I wrote in my in the checkbox area is that the purpose of letter grading, as far as I understood it, was teacher efficacy and not like a measurement of those. If the students aren't getting whatever it is that you're getting, you're doing something wrong. You need to adjust whatever your instructional practice is to meet their needs, but it's not as if we are assigning some sort of value to a child in the form of like 5 letters. Is that a fair enough way to start this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I will say as a kid who had an IEP, and I didn't think letter grading really helped my educational process. I think it just made life more stressful. I think one of the proposals that can I call you Ralph or Raphael or?
Sure, yeah, or people call me Rafi, but whatever. Ralph's good. If you want.
One of the options was to assignments could be replaced by self-grading or enter the semester portfolio, which I think is not a bad idea, because I think the fear from with let's say junking letter grading is that ultimately schooling won't be academically rigorous enough. And I think if you still have standards, there is still some methodology. You could still have something that that isn't it could be more inclusive and less draconian. So I think that definitely combines this need to be more democratic and less stringent, and also still apply standards to students and want to see them succeed and achieve their best.
For anybody who, I do apologize if I wasn't perfectly clear on what standards-based grading is. One of the major tenets is that it's not an average of like the beginning of the trimester to the end, but rather it's just where they are at the end. So okay. You're not taking, they weren't understanding it, and then they were kind of getting it, and then they got it by the end, and then you average those all together and they get an 80. But rather you say that they are meeting the standard because by the end of the time frame in which they were supposed to assimilate something, they assimilated it. And right. Therefore it's such a more fair way to say, or to reflect what it is that they know. Plus, instead of an arbitrary 76 at the end of a semester, you can say, these are the concepts here on this sheet of paper. These are the concepts that I know that this child has, and here are the concepts that I, as an educator, I still need to reach them on. But it's still a way for us to measure what we need to do, not any sort of measurement of the child, if that's fair.
So kind of like how GPA is often graded. It's a cumulative thing. So it also grades you on how well you did in 9th or 10th grade, but it doesn't take into account. But so let's just say you did quite poorly in 9th or 10th grade. You did very well in 11th and 12th grade. Your cumulative GPA might not really reflect that. Something like that?
Yeah, but hopefully from end of segment to segment, you're only taking where they are at the end of that segment, and you're not holding them and you're not punishing them, quote unquote, for something that happened in October, because October isn't, you're not where they are in May, isn't, October isn't where they are in May. That's not fair to say. That makes sense?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like how that allows you to, as a student, work more at your own pace, and you've got this end goal in mind. How you get there is more of an organic path, and it's not so, instructed. I guess your own timetable can emerge, and for students who are struggling at home with whatever reason, or have personal issues, or just are just on their own funky timetable, to tell them that they failed just because it's taking them a slightly longer time to get one topic.
Right. It's inhumane.
They can go at their own pace.
Right.
Yeah, I do. I'm thinking a lot about what Nathan said about rigor. This is a word I've heard my colleagues intone a lot, and I believe in rigor too, I guess. I'm always curious what people really mean by it, because it seems like it can sort of be a catch-all for all these sorts of resilience building things we want to do in the classroom. But how do we actually achieve that? Like, how do we get students to the place where they're writing excellent essays and reading very carefully? It is peculiar that so often we reach for grades, so that almost every assignment sometimes is graded. Everything, even their sitting in a seat in the classroom, ends up being graded, and that's a little peculiar. There is a movement to at least shift a little bit away from that. And one thing I've tried to do in my classroom is just sort of experiment with some of these ideas. Sometimes it doesn't work, sometimes it works, but that would be one thing I would love to see more of, is just people thinking again about how they want to do assessment. You can do ungraded assignments. You can have students grade themselves. God forbid you try it once, like just try it, see how it goes. And you may find that the system we've created encourages students to jump through hoops, and so they can be rigorous sometimes, but they're not left with this strong sense that they want to learn. I see this a lot at Penn. Penn is a place where students get in there by jumping through tons of hoops, so they know how to do it. So frustrating. The light sometimes doesn't really seem to be burning in them. The light, the fire doesn't seem to be burning. The desire for knowledge. The most rigorous things I've ever written, they came from me. They came from what I wanted to do something, not for somebody else, not to please somebody else, I think. So I don't know.
All right. Well, I definitely try to find that balance, especially when you're working within a university system where you do have to grade through letters. We don't have the option of the other standard there. So what I've tried to do is for the logic portion of the moral foundations class, I'll give a quiz every day, and it's your participation grade. You are not graded on accuracy, only for completion. So just do it and spread your wings and fail. It doesn't matter. I'll write in the correct answers for you, and we'll do the same exercises at the beginning of each class. And by the end, people seem to have it, and we'll have a little bit of logic on the test where I do grade for accuracy, but by the time we get there, they've become more comfortable with the material, so that pressing grade over their head is not so heavy. I think it has worked, but I'm only a couple years in. I don't know if my standards are well founded, but people seem to like it, and by the end they really like the logic quizzes, and I'm like, what's wrong with you all liking logic quizzes? But they seem to enjoy it. So I don't know if that helps contribute to the conversation.
Maybe it's that by early on showing that you aren't just going along with some pedagogical tradition whereby we kind of make the students jump a lot. You were showing that you think about your teaching, and you were showing the students that you care. And that may have been really helpful and maybe it may explain why they actually like the quizzes now, because now they see that when you quiz them, you're doing it for them to encourage them. So that, I don't know, just a guess.
Kelly, I was going to say the same thing, that it sounds like you are designing things and implementing things with the like distinct understanding that it's for their success and with them in mind, and that has to be motivating unto itself. But also, you can't be wrong if you're doing it in their best interest, and not explicitly being like, I'm doing this to you because I have to do this to you, and it's a pass or fail scenario, but you're doing it to their benefit.
I try. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad that's coming across.
Yeah.
And I think students will be able to be comfortable with with discomfort, in the learning process, with struggling with certain concepts or reading, if they know that it's in their best interest. I mean, same thing with, surgery. I mean, for crying out loud, like you undergo often quite painful procedures if you believe that it ultimately is for your own good. And I think something we're teaching. I think all teaching, all pedagogy will involve some level of discomfort or challenge. But I think the student needs to sort of, him or he needs to figure out, well, I know this is not exactly in my comfort zone, but I need to do these. I need to go through these stages of understanding, so I ultimately can achieve something, a fuller picture of the subject.
Yeah. Agree.
It's 6:50 right now, so I think maybe I want to wrap up soon so that we can hear, so that both of you have time to present. So shall I go back to my slides and be done with it?
Yes.
Okay. Then let me try to bring those back. Okay, I guess. Okay, so to summarize the thoughts I was having about the context of teaching in higher ed, my sense is that teaching tools are good if they have these features. I think they should be student-centered so that they, at least more than usual, reflect the student's interests, passions, and needs, and aren't just an opportunity for the teacher to display their brilliance. And I'm really with Emma in just I think that we should just greet with incredulity the fact that we even need this distinction. It's ridiculous. The idea that one should have to go into a college classroom and say, there really should be student-centered learning here is just absurd to me, but one actually does still need to say this kind of thing. I think that tools should be curiosity sparking. I think given the precarity of the teacher's position, they should ideally be easy for people to learn and put into practice. And I think that they should be equity enhancing, given what I said earlier about our role, if we're not careful, in actually encouraging inequity. It'd be great if these tools were transferable to remote learning and overall good for the teacher's well-being. So the tools I've just used with you now are the two tools that I want to suggest meet these 6 criteria. So we first did a questionnaire pair share, if you will. Or we did a questionnaire share. We didn't do the pair part. And what I really like about this, and I've been using it with students for a few years, is that it fills the classroom with student noise. Not in the kind of student noise sense that Emma might be used to, but I don't know if that's unfair. But what the students are talking. Normally, it's instead of the teacher talking, the students are talking to each other. No one is left out. It's very hard to wriggle out of a conversation when you're just sitting with one other person and thinking and speaking. So I did hear somebody say once that the person who's doing the most learning in the classroom is the person who's doing the most talking. I don't know if that's a scientific truth, but it's like maybe a good rule of thumb. I think the questionnaire approach also is nice for shyer students because it lets them get their thoughts together before they participate. And I have had students say that this is something they really appreciate. What I always found before I started using techniques like this is that when we have classroom-wide discussions, they play into the typical dynamics that I think are politically bad, dynamics where students who already feel comfortable in the university environment, AKA the middle class and wealthier students, are more easily able to get something out of their education. They're going to start dominating the conversation. It isn't always, but it frequently is the dudes, the white dudes, who know how to play this game where you're, participating in a conversation with like 50 people. Most Americans are uncomfortable speaking in front of 3 or 4 people. So the classroom learned conversations are really not ideal. And this breaks it up and turns all those conversations into pairwise conversations. And finally, this tool, as I've tried to illustrate it, it works online. And it also works asynchronously. So if you have students who couldn't come to the Zoom session or the video conferencing session or whatever, you can send them the link and they can participate in that way, in the kind of thinking that you did in the classroom. There is a drawback. If you have students fill out questionnaires, sometimes they will turn it into a bit of a competition. And sometimes they will triumph in finishing first. And that has to do with the way that I think the university becomes this intellectually competitive environment where there's lots of showboating. And I think a remedy is to say repeatedly, the first 3 or 4 times you use these questionnaires, I think if you emphasize that they're not graded, they are tools that are designed to help the students come to their own opinion about a topic, that they can skip any questions they want, and that they're not encouraged to go quickly, that they're actually encouraged to be reflective, and it's okay if they don't finish it. I think if you emphasize these things, then that's the best way to deal with this competitiveness problem. The second teaching tool I want to call to your attention is what sometimes called the question formulation technique. This actually is a technique that's used a lot in K through 12. Emma, have you ever heard of this thing?
Yes.
I'm seeing a look on your face like, oh God. Well,
No.
Oh, okay.
It's funny how all of my names for these are just a lot smaller and shorter. It's a little.
What do you call this?
Well, the other one was think, pair, share instead of questionnaire, pair, share. Yours has a nicer ring to it because it rhymes, but questionnaire is not gonna. A first grader would trip over it.
With think, pair, share, when I've done think, pair, share, it's normally just one question. But maybe we could call the questionnaire, pair, share, think, pair, share too. But the point is that you really work through almost like an ungraded quiz. And my questionnaires will often have 5 or 6 questions on them. So I don't know, maybe it does count as think, pair, share. Is that true? Yeah. And then the other thing to do with students is to give them an opportunity to practice asking their own questions. And the chief promulgators of this approach say this is particularly important for marginalized students, because those students are going to get a lot out of knowing how to ask a question of a doctor or a lawyer or a teacher or a boss. And so it's a very important skill for citizens to know how to ask a good question. Peculiarly, historically, we have not taught the art of asking a good question. Instead, the teacher poses the questions and the students respond, the Socratic method. We might think of this as the anti-Socratic method, and the point is to help students develop their own ability to become Socrates and pose difficult questions to people in power. So having some time for people to deliberately devise questions and spending some time talking with students about how to write good questions is, I think, a really valuable use of classroom time. And one thing I want to emphasize about both of these approaches is that they're not just good for the students. I think that they can be very good for you as a teacher, particularly the question formulation technique. If you have been having a rough day, if you just had to commute between campuses and you've arrived and you're covered in mud, you can start with question formulation. And in any context, you can have students do this. And while the students are working on their questions, you can take a breath and think about what you want to do next. And it takes the spotlight off of you. I find it particularly useful to have students write their questions first, and then I have them do another activity. During that activity, I read their questions. And then when we come back together as a group, I can give an on-the-spot lecture in response to one of their questions. I now know that I'm answering questions they genuinely have, instead of designing my lectures around questions that I have and creating boring content that they tune out of. I can answer on the spot questions that they have in the moment. And I think that makes for a much more meaningful experience for both me and them. So those are the two tools I had in mind to mention. I want to thank Kelly very much and the Launcher Philosophy Foundation for organizing this event. I encourage you to get in touch with me on various social media outlets such as Twitter or email. I have a website. And finally, if you like listening to podcasts, I want to recommend this one here at the bottom of the slide. I've learned a lot from that one. So thank you so much for your time and for participating with me.
Yay! Thank you so much, Rafi. That was a wonderful presentation. You gave so much to think about. I'm like all abuzz with questions and comments and excitement. But we shall move on.
Are we recording?
Yes, we are recording.
Oh, we are recording.
Yes. Next, we have Emma Gibbons from the Boston Conservatory at Berkeley, exploring the ways which holistic music education strengthens socio-emotional learning for children with ASD, empowering them with the reflective and communicative tools necessary to navigate life beyond school. So this is very exciting. At the Lawn Chair Philosophy Foundation, we are all about difference and broadening our horizons, and philosophy can be so insular in its own little world. We need to listen to other fields. So not only because we are particularly driven by music and rhythm in our metaphysics, we're really happy to have a different perspective. We're happy to learn from you. Okay. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for having me. And I apologize if I was making faces, Rafi, during that presentation. I am 100% guilty, 100% of the time, of not being in 100% control of my face. And when you're working with first graders and singing, that I worry frequently about what that means for them. So I am going to share my screen and I'm going to talk really slowly so that as I am doing, there we go. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about the communication half, and then get a little bit into the socio-emotional part. And they're so interrelated that it's impossible to disentangle them anyway. So specifically, my master's is it's in music education with a concentration in ASD and autism spectrum disorder. And so I guess it's smart to start with just the broad definition of what the DSM-5 says is ASD. It's a broad range of conditions characterized by challenges with social skills, repetitive behaviors, speech, and nonverbal communication. That affects 1 in 59 children in the United States. It's 54 now. That was 2019. Now it's 2020. So 54, which means that we all have students with ASD. There's a clinician and researcher who says that most parents of autistic children first develop concerns for the child's development when early delay or regression occurs in speech. Communication is one of the first things that they notice, and arguably one of the stronger barriers to the full range of our culture today, and certainly of higher education. Which is not necessarily what either one of my graduate papers were, but it's definitely applicable. So regression of development in speech can look like aberrant speech features, unusual word choice, pronoun reversal, echolalia, incoherent discourse, aberrant prosody, where you're putting the accent on the wrong syllable. Sometimes it can look like an unresponsiveness to questions, which doesn't necessarily mean at all that they're not listening. It's just that it's a communicative, it's a expressive communication delay. It's not at all that they're not hearing you or not understanding. Or sometimes it's been described as a lack of drive to communicate, but again, that's not always the case. It's more often a lack of tools and not a lack of desire. So while some neurotypical children by their first birthday are already starting to say a few words and responding to the sound of their name and intentionally communicating by pointing at something, a child with ASD may not. And And so you're also seeing like, because they're not engaging and they're not initiating joint attention, they're not engaging in dramatic or pretend play, and they're not engaging socially, which means they're having even less opportunities to practice communication, which means that they have even less social, and it just compounds upon itself. And so on this first slide here, this was Dr. Adam Ockelford. He said, the instinctive adult reaction is to try to remediate things, to enhance children's quality of life by encouraging them to communicate, to form reciprocally warm relationships with other people, and to broaden their range of experiences. And I think it's super important, especially this early in the discussion, to point out that he's saying to remediate things. It's not fixing the person, it's fixing the circumstances around the person to give them access to their surroundings. It's a problem. I mean, we talk about this in universal design all the time, right? That there's nothing wrong with the person. It's the fact that there's a thing on the sidewalk that's blocking their way to the sidewalk. So I want to talk about the commonalities between music and language processing, because music is my wheelhouse, and so I would like to be able to use my wheelhouse to give my students with ASD a doorway into communication, whatever way that I can. I am not a speech language pathologist, and I am not an occupational therapist. I am not a behavioral therapist. I cannot seek to do 100% of the work on my own. If there is a therapist who's working one-on-one with a child and they're not seeing instantaneous results, it's ridiculous to think that I will, but it's my job certainly to give them the tools that I can give them. Let's see what we got on this one. Right, so I'm going to talk about language and music, how they're related, and the relationship of each of those, how we acquire those things, how we process that information, and then how we spit it back out. So problematically, regions of the brain, people are always saying that that we process music and we process language in the same areas of the brain, but I don't have to tell you guys in higher ed that correlation does not equal causation, so we can't just say because they happen there. But we do know that the evidence is overwhelming that actively making music plays a major role in the developing oral perceptual processing systems, which facilitate the encoding and identification of speech, sounds, and patterns, which in turn enhance language skills. So we can observe it happening. Again, correlation does not prove causation. I'm not trying to say that, but there is a correlation that we can look to capitalize on. Another importance is time. I am particularly passionate. The reason I am in early ed and not somewhere else is because the critical period where we develop language and music abilities is age. Our neuroplasticity is most neuroplastic from age 1 or 2 to age like 6 or 7. It's not that you can't learn music or a second language after age 7 or 8, but the neuroplasticity, we stop learning bottom up and we start learning top down. And so that's why I'm where I am. The sensitive period for learning music and language is the same, that it's about ages 1 to 2 to ages 6 or 7. And I just kind of accidentally said my next point, which was Gestalt psychology and predictability, where as we're younger, we're building up our understanding of things. And then as we're older, it's not that we can't learn new things. It's just that we have to fit it into our hierarchy of how we understand the world. And as people in higher education, I think it's so phenomenal that you guys are doing that you are taking what people have as their hierarchy of understanding, and that you are poking holes in those walls and allowing them to think of things in new ways. And I imagine that's just so much harder when you do have that top-down processing in older children. So kudos to you guys. I don't envy you at all. The very, very specific similarities between language and music and understanding them is rhythm. Rhythm is the first one that I wanted to talk about. Many studies going back from 1987, I know we're not allowed to use things pre-2010, but as early as 1987, we were confirming that the musical preference and sensitivity of autistic children can be positively transferred to non-musical behaviors. And rhythm pattern perception is certainly something that we can capitalize on. Perceived as a temporal figure based on beat patterns, rhythms, often repetitive nature, provides perceptual elements that ultimately facilitate focused cortical activation. Rhythm is considered one of the most important elements of learning spoken language. And even nonverbal children who have autism tend to be more attentive and motivated to imitate and learn word sounds that are broken down rhythmically. We've heard stories where if you hear something sung, it's easier to remember, and people who never speak can sometimes still sing, and there is a relationship there that is not fully understood, but it's certainly been witnessed. Sorry, turning my pages and pages of notes. Pitch and melodic contour is something else to look at, and can be transferred to speech in the realm of prosody. Perceived melodic patterns that are stored and recalled as pitch memory, and organized patterns of different pitches constitute a melody in music as well as prosody of speech. Reinforced by that Gestalt hierarchy of rhythm, melodic contour creates different physiological and psychological states of anticipation in listeners. And Dorita Esberger, doctor, said, attention is nothing more than a state of anticipation. The brain waits and attends for information by remaining in a holding pattern until some resolution allows for processing to conclude. All that speech trading is anticipating that someone is going to say something and hearing when that cadence is finished. So the understanding of pitch is super important there, and it's related to the Broca's area. Again, I don't want to strengthen that relationship too much, but I'm very, very sensitive to that, assuming that correlation and causation are the same. They are most certainly not. Dynamics. Oh, I already said that to you, sorry. Dynamics, the musical dynamics parallel human dynamics. Rhythm and melody are emphasized by dynamics, and dynamics parallel human dynamics in terms of moods, level of excitability, and physical and psychological states. I'm sure that you can tell by my dynamics changing back and forth. You can hear my varying levels of nervousness. That's definitely, like, it's indicative of something. You can probably also hear both my tempo and my pitch doing the same thing. So it's because you're anticipating what I'm saying and you're waiting for my sentence to be over. Form, it elicits that anticipation and attention again, and it's related to semantics. Let's look. Oh, okay. So strategies to capitalize on this in very specific ways. So I could say that just by engaging in music in my classroom, I'm already giving them ways to, like, doorways into communication and speech, but that wouldn't be 100% fair or accurate. So Dr. Andrew Knight and Paige Raybon of their MMT MBC is music therapist board certified. So this paper was written in 2017. They give us what? How many? Lots and lots. I think 7, 8, 9, 10. So let me back up and say that when I was originally doing this research, I was super excited for, I'm going to be able to do this and that will make this happen. I'm going to do this and that will make this happen. And I think we kind of all know that there is no, like, plug and play solution for understanding and learning at all. And this paper definitely confirmed that. There are few, if any, he said, clear-cut solutions and techniques that are replicable across varying diagnoses, because no two people are the same, no two people learn the same way, and therefore there is no plug-and-play answer. So I was, like, disheartened, but they provided some helpful suggestions and guidelines for clinicians and others. The overarching rule being that very first thing, to act creatively within the process, to particularly to keep the students' preferences as an integral part of the decision-making process. And this kind of goes back to something Rafi was saying, where when we put the learning in their hands and we capitalize on what motivates them, that the rigor and the self-direction will come naturally, because we're giving them a way into what it is that they want to do, whether we give them the question asking power, or we give them the content power, whatever it may be, but we have to put their interests first so that we can capitalize on their motivating factors. They warn that there could be a reticence to respond that may actually be more of a behavioral and like an inhibition than purely a reflection of language delay or deficit. They point out that the temporal aspects of language and music are equally important. So using chants could be like a place to start with slowed down repetitive target phrases. So specifically thinking about like working with their classroom teacher, working with their speech language pathologist on specific things that they want them to be able to say, whatever their immediate goals are, and specifically reinforcing those through a written song that you make up that is that where you can weave in a chant that works that in. To exaggerate vocal affect, gestures, and emotive singing towards them, and to encourage them to use a growing variety of emotions in communicating back to you. So I think another way to say this is to just naturally like encourage silliness. So that will give them both a model of what an emotive voice sounds like and what emotive actions look like, but also the freedom to try it also, because you've kind of already broken that seal by doing it also. Include several domains for attention and engagement. I feel like I'm just repeating myself over and over, but this goes again back to incorporate their interests. Engage the child in several domains, even with the primary target of expressive communication. Modeling large movement interventions that match with the aforementioned exaggerated vocal affect. Peer models, learning from learning from people that look and sound exactly like them, rather than like you being the model, having somebody that is their size, their shape, their age, relatability, that all, it could reinforce many, many things. There it is. Again, correlation does not equal causation, but if something works, use it twice. And most of all, I think, to mind all developmental milestones in areas besides expressive communication. It would be unreasonable to expect something that isn't developmentally appropriate. So just to know what is reasonable to expect. And this could look many ways in higher education, depending on the rigor of the hoops that they had to jump through to get there, right? I don't know what UPenn program looks like. I know that at Berkeley and Boston Conservatory, which was bought by Berkeley, so now it's the same thing. We are developing programs to allow, sometimes they are called bridge programs, where there is a wide range of intellectual ability, a wide range of physical ability, the entire spectrum. And it is our responsibility, even though not all educators are trained in special education or trained in non-neurotypical learning, to address everybody's needs. And so it's more important than ever that we all mind the milestones. All right, so Camille Geist. This was, what year was this? Oh, it was 2008. Please forgive me. But she talks about how she targets decreasing echolalia by using songs that have imitation exercises and like fill in the blank. She noticed, like the other guy noticed, the previous researcher noticed, that there is an absence of studies documenting interdisciplinary approaches with communication and music therapy, and that one size does not fit all. So she led a study to do exactly this, that purposefully and intentionally integrated music therapy and speech language therapy, and found an improvement in social interaction as well as clear communication, significant positive behavioral responses, and that this seemed almost not like too good to be true. The echolalia was reduced from 95% to under 10%. That's one of those things where you got to question that data. But there is other research that's not nearly as like panacea dramatic, that that supports using fill in the blank songs, call and response songs to decrease echolalia in certain students. Allowing for opportunities for repetition. The more familiar you are with something, the more comfortable you're going to be with it. The more Kelly was mentioning this, where she does the same logic, not the same logic like question, but like the same types of the same activity at the beginning of each class, so that by the end, it's maybe not their favorite thing, but they're telling her it is because they have gotten so comfortable with it that it's not scary anymore. And that it's fair to ask them to perform that task because they've had multiple chances to access it. She also noticed a lot of social validation. It's really hard to measure social validation. But the warmer the climate is that you create, the more opportunities you allow for success and the more tools that you give students to succeed, the more you are allowing for like that strange social hierarchy, like some of the competition that we notice in the classroom, that can be weaned away. Okay. Last one, developmental speech language training through music for children with autism spectrum disorders, theory and clinical application, 2012. To take every opportunity to link speech to song, to a technique called parts in context. It's basically just fill in the blank, and to write your own, you as the instructor, write repertoire that specifically targets the speech and communication needs of your students, rather than looking for a song that will fit the bill or choosing a random song that you like as the song for that day, but write something with a particular student in mind, with a particular target goal. There is absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. And just one more time as a reminder, to mind all the milestones, to know what is reasonable to expect of a student, of any individual student, to know that child holistically so that you can make those assessments and targets. And I don't want to speak out of turn, but I assume that you guys have lots and lots of students at the levels that you're at. So Rafi, how many students do you have?
I co-teach a course that has 70 students at the moment.
Okay.
I don't feel like it's a lot because I'm teaching with other people too.
That's true, and I am super jealous of co-teaching. I wish I could do that.
It is really wonderful, but you don't have as much autonomy anymore. You have to make decisions as a team.
Fair enough. So you have 70 total?
Yeah, and I mean, in various semesters I've had as many as 100. Sometimes I've done small seminars.
Gotcha. Kelly, how many do you have?
I have 32, I believe, right now.
Very good. And then how many do you have, Nathan?
So unlike all of you, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on who you ask, I am not an academic. I wish I was, but I do. I work at Temple's College of Public Health as a peer mentor. So I guess that's somewhat of an academic background, I guess.
Definitely.
Usually mentoring like people one-on-one. So I actually have, luckily, I have a good, a small class size, so to speak. But I will say that like teaching other people at the ASD that I have, it is a challenge. I mean, I think they often smaller class sizes means that each student gets more attention. That is true. But even with, but one of the advantages, at least for some people with autism, is in being in large crowd sizes, they can kind of disappear in the crowd. Sometimes when they actually have like a peer-to-peer like relationship with a teacher, it can be very uncomfortable because they can't kind of wiggle themselves out. They're kind of put on, there's a spotlight on them. So, but again, each student, you have to sort of evaluate holistically and kind of assess their needs and vulnerabilities.
I'm very glad you said that, and I'm very jealous of the one-on-one experience. And I was going to say that it is possible to get to know those things that seem to have nothing to do with the subject matter, but you're going to need to capitalize them, like a love of dinosaurs or a love of whatever it could be, whatever is age appropriate for whoever you're teaching. I have 420. So, and it's still possible. It's really, really hard, but it's still possible. And so, yeah, so you can totally do it then. All right, cool. What time is it? Because I just talk and talk and talk. It's only 25 after. Okay, so if it's all right with you, this research is incomplete because this date came before this actual thing was due. So I am going to talk for less time about this other bit. So when I'm talking about reaching the child holistically, the music part is obviously the part where I have particular objectives where they're state measured and I have to do them. And then the communication part is something I feel very strongly about. Socio-emotional learning is the thing that Kelly mentioned when she introduced me. And it's what I'm currently like studying in depth. So I'm just going to talk briefly about that. And I imagine that if there was a section that would engender questions, it would be this second one. But I also hear myself like word vomiting. So is there anything that needs clarification before I continue?
No, ma'am.
Thanks. Okay, so the nerves, man, the nerves. It's so funny, like 7-year-olds I can do, but talking with like other revered intellectuals, competition or no,
revered.
Like, this is actually really helpful.
Revered. I like that.
But like I can hear myself like a mile a minute, so I do apologize. Anyway, here I go screen sharing again. For less.
Intellectual is a way too kind of a way to describe at least myself. So.
You've got time to disprove it. You have time. All right. So here is the other half of well, it's not half because it's shorter, but the intersection of music, socio-emotional learning, and ASD. So in 1994, in a meeting in Michigan. Two things were born: the Collaboration for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, which is the abbreviation for which is CASEL, and the term socio-emotional learning were born. A collection of researchers, educators, and child advocates wanted to establish high-quality, evidence-based social and emotional learning as an essential part of preschool through high school education. Now it's 25 years later. CASEL defines socio-emotional learning as the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions, which is like such a huge chunk of life. They identify 5 core competencies: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. They go even more in depth. Self-awareness is the ability to accurately recognize one's own emotions through their own and how emotions influence behavior, which includes accurately assessing one's strengths and limitations and possessing a well-grounded sense of confidence and optimism. That is just one of the 5 tenets of socio-emotional learning, and the further I go down this list, the more I'm like, oh my goodness, how does anyone teach this to anybody? And aren't we all still learning to do this? And I think the answer is yes. They define self-management as the ability to regulate one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations, which includes managing stress, emotions, thoughts, and behaviors effectively in different situations. Motivating oneself, controlling impulses, and setting and working towards achieving personal and academic goals. Social awareness is the ability to take the perspective of and empathize with others from diverse backgrounds. and cultures, to understand social and ethical norms for behavior, and to recognize family, school, and community resources and supports. Relationship skills are defined as the ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships with diverse individuals and groups, which includes communicating clearly, listening actively, cooperating, resisting inappropriate social pressure, negotiating conflict constructively, and seeking and offering help when needed. I still can't do that one. And responsible decision making is the ability to make constructive and respectful choices about personal behavior and social interactions based on consideration of ethical standards, safety concerns, social norms, the realistic evaluation of consequences of various actions, and the well-being of self and others. Now, I said somewhat kind of to get myself off the hook that this is a lifelong thing. And yes, so when I'm working with, say, a K2 population, I am giving them like ground floor abilities to build on these. I'm not necessarily holding myself or a 7-year-old to be 100% competent at that huge laundry list of life skills. But education does value this greatly. CASEL has a collaborating states initiative that published a brief in March of 2020, which was like a month and a half ago, that detailed both the federal and state initiatives regarding socio-emotional learning. At the federal level, I think the biggest initiative is the United States Department of Education's launch of the Center to Improve Social and Emotional Learning in School Safety. At the state level, all 50 states have this for pre-K. All 50 states have adopted either competencies or standards. 11 of those states have extended those standards to early elementary, and then 18 states, including New Jersey, have socio-emotional standards for K through 12, which is up from 1 in 2011. So we're making considerable progress, and that's fantastic. And that means that teachers are already bound to this, or they better get ready. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to look at this, but more so when talking about the community with ASD, I specifically, because I have 420 students, I have every range of need imaginable, as does anybody who's working with a varied group of students. It doesn't matter at what age level or really in what context. I don't necessarily have to remind you what the definition of ASD is, but I will say that like the impaired social skills that's included in the definition can manifest as lack of nonverbal communication behaviors, impairments in eye gaze and facial expressions, lack of peer relationships, lack of shared enjoyment, and lack of social and emotional reciprocity. Because it's difficult to generalize because of just how much of a spectrum it truly is. It can be accompanied by mental health challenges like anxiety, depression, and attention issues. And so I personally feel that that call has a heightened call to SEL instruction. Communication and socio-emotional learning. I mentioned this back at the beginning, but that was a half an hour ago. Because like the DSM-5, for example, the diagnostic criteria is a persistent deficit in social communication. Like that term social communication suggests that you can't unbind the two. In order for us to have healthy social relationships and an engagement in the community, one has to be able to communicate, be it verbally or non-verbally, however, whatever that communication mechanism looks like, in order to engage socially. Communication is just a part of that. And so it's going to sound like I'm continuing to repeat myself, but I promise it's slightly nuanced. So what that means for me as a specialist teacher, what that means for anybody teaching a variety of anyone, is that we have to be able to adapt to these things. And so that's why I'm doing it. Mentioned they overlap for communication. The broad case for using my field specifically to teach socio-emotional learning is because music has long been used as a social medium. It's social from both a musical and an interpersonal perspective. The act of group music making can encourage social bonding and the development of social relationships. I've got a big list there that says cooperation, communication, positive peer interactions, recognition and supports of the rights of others, dependability, responsibility, focus of attention, impulse control, delayed gratification. Has anybody practiced an instrument ever? Delayed gratification. And acceptance of consequences are just some of the skills that students can learn in a music classroom. Dr. Lori Gooding, who I'm going to mention more than once, wrote in the Journal of Music Therapy in 2011. She lists literally those same skills. I'm pretty sure that the guy who wrote the book that I pulled this from was quoting her directly. And she added that musical experiences have been shown to teach positive changes in social behaviors, stimulate nonverbal expression, facilitate self-expression, develop interpersonal skills, facilitate social play, develop group cohesion, and improve on-task behaviors. And she also mentions that music can play a role in managing mood, which, yes, sort of. Influencing choices and changing attitudes, and our attitude and our mood definitely affects behaviors and the influence on social interaction. We learn to mitigate that as neurotypical adults most of the time. But that job is so much harder when you're balancing, you're dealing with things on top of an everyday mood. So another reason that music is useful for this specifically is that there is some research that suggests that people with ASD exhibit enhanced musical abilities and enjoyment. You got to be careful when you say things like that, right? Because we can't generalize. But there is research that suggests that that some people with ASD get to enjoy pitch perfectness and enhanced pitch perception. So if they do exhibit extra musical enjoyment or extra musical ability, it would be wrong not to use that. In that same way that earlier we were talking about capitalizing on interests. If music is the interest, of course, we're going to do that. And another reason that I specifically want to continue to put this into my practice when the school counselors and occupational therapists are already using social interventions like social stories, social autopsies, comic strip conversations, mind reading, video detective, power cards. When they're using strategies like that, why am I piling on? And there is some research that worries that there is a lack of generalization and transference. And if I can provide even one kid with better generalization and transference of those skills from my room and the occupational therapist's room to the rest of their lives, then it's a worthwhile endeavor. I should stop and say, just like I did before, that the purpose of identifying and interventions is not about managing unwanted behavior or fixing anyone or anything, but rather to equip people to be able to self-manage and to prepare them for the world beyond the classroom and give them the tools to access it with the freedom that someone who is neurotypical with every advantage has. So it's not about fixing anybody. It's just about giving people the tools to succeed that we give everyone else. Right. And also, I do worry that music for music's sake gets lost in this. So just to quickly quote the Handbook of Arts Education and Special Education Policy, Research and Practice in 2018, although the ultimate goals for individuals with disabilities may be the promotion of their personal autonomy and the enhancement of their quality of life, we can embrace these goals while ensuring that their intellectual and musical lives are serviced as well. I don't want music for music's sake to get lost. These are the two things that I did want to talk about in terms of social intervention. There's plenty more to be said, and I have another few weeks to plenty say them. But for right now, and to eventually give my time to Nathan, who deserves it, who's been waiting for quite a long time, I have a target for joint attention and a target for mirroring. Joint attention is exactly what it sounds like. And there are two types. There's responding to someone calling your name, or following someone's finger when you're pointing over there and saying, look at that, or initiating it. And it's important to point out that those are not equal, and those are not also like, if you can get this, then you can get this. And like I had mentioned earlier, if the OT person is not getting it in a one-on-one setting, like, don't push that. You can certainly initiate a bid for joint attention on your own with a xylophone or a drum, and have that be okay, and not beat yourself up because you didn't get the child to initiate that bid for joint attention. But she recommends, Dr. Lori Gooding, who I said I would say, I'm saying her again, least to most prompting. So the more we talk and the more bids that we put in for joint attention, especially verbal prompts for joint attention, somebody who's dealing with dyspraxia or sensory overload, the more you're saying is not helping, you're making it worse. So plus you can't eventually engender autonomy and having them do that on their own if you are providing too many supports too soon. So least to most prompting mechanism for that, to not be afraid to use repetitions to give them control over the content again. Augmentative alternative communication devices is the fanciest way to say like a prop. So that you can, let me find where it is in my notes because I've said it better on paper than I'm going to spit it out at you now. But where did it go? Oh, okay. So using an augmentative alternative communication device, or a prop, provides the teacher the opportunity to engage in shaping responses, so that you can get a response from, would you like the blue bell or the red bell, and even withholding the thing until they say it, granted scaffolding, so you don't withhold it if they never say it, but you can continually place a bid for something that simple, and then the reward is something that they very much want. But another reason to use a AAC or a prop is so that they can engage in joint attention with a peer, because you can facilitate peer modeling and joint attention bidding at the same time, and you can encourage them to say, something as simple as your turn, or building in patterned things like here you go, Nathan, or whatever it is. So you can build in just naturally occurring social reciprocity that way. And illustrated songbooks. It sounds hokey, but if you are doing something repetitively with a xylophone, that xylophone never changes. It's still cool, but it's still a xylophone. But if you are accompanying a song with a book, every page has a new picture and the engagement is started all over again. It sounds like I'm just saying like add toys, but I promise like that they are communicative tools that we can use in that regard. Another really important thing for socially engaging with people is mirroring. Mirroring doesn't happen very often, especially with more severe cases of ASD. And the paper that I'm mainly drawing on for this is called Dyadic Drumming Across the Lifespan Reveals a Zone of Proximal Development in Children. And the paper starts like this. It says, the need to coordinate one's own behavior with that of others pervades social life. Salient examples include playing music, participating in team sports, or dancing. Collective play, everyday communication, and various bonding behaviors also rely on implicit or intentional forms of coordinated behavior, and even antagonistic activities like boxing or soccer. Individuals need to coordinate with each other in order to compete effectively, which I don't think I would have thought of on my own. Like, obviously things like dancing and playing we need to, but yeah, even in things like soccer there are aspects of mirroring. So they go on to explain that a fundamental dimension of socially coordinated behavior is the ability to purposefully adapt the timing of one's own behavior to that of others. So they used a dyadic drumming study to determine somewhat predictably that two young adults did better at mirroring one another than when adult was paired with a child, and that the adult-child pair did better than two children. Or rather, the child had a higher rate of interpersonal action synchronization when they were paired with adult, as opposed to when they were paired with another child. And I know I have been advocating for peer modeling and student autonomy and student-centered learning this entire time. But this is maybe one area where it's okay to have the teacher paired with a student. Because as long as you're not making like a big thing out of it, because the research shows that that child is going to have a better chance of more effectively mirroring you if you're you than if you're another 7-year-old. And so that is where this PowerPoint stops. However, what the rest of my work will look like is it's going to continue to look at emotional development, whether or not music actually does elicit emotion. There's a really interesting paper on alexithymia that kind of toys with this idea, and I would love to say in an email from Kelly a month or two from now, just exactly like how it's very interesting. So it'll be looking at alexithymia, which is when you have a difficult time expressing your emotions, which is definitely an issue here. Emotional regulation, emotional range, self-determination, self-image, and then what the implication of musical attunement is, the implication that teachers really ought to have a lot more patience, that the eureka moment is not going to be a moment, but rather a sunrise, about the long view, and about social identity theory and how the way we see ourselves and the way our students with ASD see themselves, and how to empower, once we give them that empowerment, how that changes their outlook. And a final thought perhaps about allowing a doorway into the mainstream culture for whatever length of time, for whatever at whatever capacity they would like. And that I can't stress enough that it's not about making them come to us. It's more universally designing my instruction and the environment in which I provide instruction or facilitate instruction and facilitate learning to make it maximum for my students. Full stop.
All right. Yay!
Thank you. Thank you for letting me talk really, really fast.
Well, I'm going to paraphrase Schopenhauer, who said that in a musical event, in a musical moment, the mind is philosophizing without even realizing it. And I think that you're really onto something with this idea of allowing self-exploration for persons who are overwhelmed to begin with, reflecting on your own self. The conditions of your experience are necessary in order to communicate with others and to share your experience. But it's an overwhelming thing to do in the first place for anybody, but especially if you're experiencing sensory overload, to reflect on yourself earnestly and logically and rigorously can be too much. So I think directing your whole self into this activity where you can create something of your own, have a good time, share with others on a nonverbal realm, you can start to condition the possibility to come to your own terms with yourself and the world. So I'm super excited with where your research is going. I definitely want to hear the end results. Sorry for prying into your world too soon. But yeah, that's great. Anyway.
And I will say that, there's obviously a lot of, is my mic on?
Your mic is on.
Okay, my mic is on. Okay, I was going to say there's obviously a lot of information to digest, but I will say that one thing that struck me very interesting was how rhythm and melody and pitch are just as essential to understanding language as music is. And I'm thinking firstly that, for Pythagoreans, learning music was part of like the philosophical education. And I think that's really been lost, and we just think, Pythagoras is just a weird, number nerd or something. Maybe he was, but I think the Pythagoreans were onto something. And two, I think this like connection between like song and language, there's an Emerson quote, which is something to the effect of that language is, fossilized poetry, and I think there are these theories of language, especially in like cognitive science, where it's like where some cavemen said refers to rock and stug refers to sky or something. And I think we forget is that the origin of language probably came from a similar mode of understanding of trying to discern patterns and rhythms in sound. So I definitely think you're on the right track by sort of synoptically seeing these two pathways as coming from a similar root.
And a lot of specifically about like the about melody and timbre and the stuff about and like that relationship to language. Consider babies. They communicate with their mothers, and babies don't speak any English at that point. They are purely picking up on when the mother's voice goes up, when the mother uses her voice to like when a mother is cooing and their voice is coming down, and the baby takes that as a signal to relax. If it's just, and in nature, the different sounds that animals make to communicate the different things. We have been from the before we were born interpreting sound as specific meaning, and then over time we take chunks of sound to mean specific things, like you were saying about like the way cave people spoke. But yeah, we've been doing it we were doing it before we were doing formal language.
Right. Go ahead.
Oh, well, is there anything else that anyone would like to add? Any questions or comments or?
Sure. This was so interesting, and there's so much of what you were talking about, Emma, that I find very valuable for me, both as someone who teaches much older students and also just as another human being, because my social and emotional learning is still continuing, and it certainly continued through graduate school, and it continues now. And I regard it as very much part of my gig, teaching students. I mean, it has to happen on the sly, but and even though you were talking about students with ASD, as I suspected, and I saw your talk, and I thought, you know what, this is going to be so relevant. I just know it, even though it sounds like it's about another population, it's going to be so relevant to what I do. And now you have me thinking that maybe I need to introduce like a drum circle into my seminar, so we can bond.
You do.
And so we can do something else than talk. It just sounds great. Yeah. So I've been trying to think of some good questions, and let's see. I mean, I have a really big question you can't answer now, I don't think, which is just like, how do you teach SEL? But I want to know more about that. But actually, no, can I ask you a more specific question?
Yes.
Or you were going to say something, but.
No, just that I think when you were saying on the sly, yeah, everything's dressed up in, this is the musical thing we're doing today.
Yeah.
But you never pick anything with only one target in mind, right? You're always picking things because it's going to hit this, and this, because I only have 45 minutes. And so, right. But you were going to ask a specific question.
It's like, sometimes I look back over my education, and I just wonder, like, how many subtle allegorical lessons was I being provided? When I was being told in my elementary school classroom, please sharpen your pencil or something like that. Like, did somebody think like, oh, we want the students to sharpen their pencils so that they get used to like the idea of cultivating your craft, and like, I don't know, like, it's just something so stupid as, who knows?
Hopefully they were doing that. Hopefully they were choosing every word intentionally. Hopefully.
I tend to imagine that there's an enormous subtext to what I do. Not a deliberate subtext, but in the mind of the student. There must be an enormous subtext to everything we're doing, and that I'm not aware of it, and I just have to be kind of conscious that they are picking up on all kinds of other messages. But a specific question. A crucial moment in your research, it has to do with showing that the skills generalize, I think, right? So,
Yes.
and I'm curious about that because it's, why do you need to show that? Isn't it enough to show, wouldn't it be incredible to show that students develop their empathy when they're learning how to play the triangle? And it's just a common sense that, we do generalize our skills eventually. If I am learning how to bake, then eventually I might notice that there are analogies between baking and other things, and I might draw those analogies. And this is like such a common human thing to do. Is there really the possibility that these skills will become trapped in the music classroom, and the students learn how to be kind to one another when they're singing, and then they go back to being jerks when they're
yeah, I totally get what you're saying.
Like,
and they go back to being jerks. No, I think you're right. I think I specifically am concerned about two parts here. One, if we're teaching them how to be learners and not just teaching them to be fact regurgitators, right? Which I think everybody here is doing. I think we're all pretty good educators. Then yeah, you're right. There's no worry about that. They're not going to go back to being jerks on the playground. I think I specifically am worried about transference among this population specifically. I think you're totally right that most of the time a neurotypical learner is going to take what they know, but it's very specific to the compartmentalizing nature of the particular way that some people learn. And so I just want to make sure that the concepts of mirroring and transference are learned in as many and are honed as many times as possible so that they get learned. Not that I'm worried that no one will. I just want to provide as many opportunities as possible. But you're right, and I should probably clarify, or at least give more credence to the idea that some skills are naturally transferable, and what it is about the nature of the way some of us learn that doesn't allow for that to happen. It's given me something to think about.
Perhaps the conclusion should simply be that if the music classroom does end up being a place where students can learn how to act well, and if they can't transfer those skills outside the classroom, then they should just forever remain making music.
Right, and they should just have to live with me.
Yeah, with you, or hopefully just
in the realm, like not my
at
house.
least generalize to other contexts in which they're making music, and they can just be making music for the rest of their life.
I like that too.
Where they can shine.
Thank you very much. I like that too.
Thank you for a really, really interesting talk, Emma. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you guys for listening. I'm so glad because you're right that my the description of what I was going to talk about today, it was like, one of these things is not like the other. And so I was worried that there was so much higher ed here, and I was like, all right, here I come as a kindergarten music maker. But I'm glad, of course, you guys are able to take these things and transfer them to other areas of your own work. So thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Emma Gibbons, and everyone for these wonderful questions. Now we are going to turn to Nathan Deichter, a freelance consultant working notably with the Institute of Contemporary Art, the University of Pennsylvania, who will be sharing experiences creating sensory-friendly, perpetually inclusive educational spaces in the museum setting. So thank you, Nathan, for reaching out. This is actually the first time I'm meeting you. You've always shown such enthusiasm for what we're doing, so I'm very excited to have you here today. Please proceed.
By the way, we also have another participant on the call, Caroline.
Carol?
Is she there? Oh well.
Oh, Caroline.
Oh, there she is.
Hi. I'm just here as a listener. Not I didn't prepare anything for the group, but and I had to come in late, so here I am.
Really glad you could join us.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for your presence and your beautiful face. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. Okay.
Okay, Nathan.
It's no worries, but it's actually Dieter, not Dieter. Everyone gets that wrong, so
Oh,
don't.
I'm sorry.
But that was a really great presentation from Emma. And if I seemed distracted a few times during the presentation, I also have ADD, but also there's just been some commotion around the house, so I've been looking other way, looking that direction, and whatnot. But I didn't mean to be rude or anything.
Okay.
Social etiquette, even on Zoom. So let me share. Can everyone see this? Okay, and we will present. Okay, or hang on, I just want to make sure I can pull up Zoom. So, can everyone hear me?
Yes, sorry, we're all muted. Yes.
Oh, you're all muted. Okay. Okay. So, I think Kelly gave. I gave Kelly my notes. And does everyone have them? Or, I mean, they're not essential, but.
Oh, I didn't know I was supposed to pass those on.
It's fine, honestly. It's. I'll just read it from myself, or I can just read it from here.
Okay.
Okay. So, I want to start this. So first I want to thank Kelly for organizing this and especially under these difficult circumstances. But so what I wanted to present on today is accessibility and empowerment, and more in particular, kind of creating the practices and the spaces that allow for these practices in pedagogy, both in art museums, but also in the classroom. This is sort of like it's two-pillar approach of understanding practice and space and how they sort of complement each other, and how you create these spaces for people with disabilities or learning disadvantages, or even just normal students who just struggle in environments and with practices that are just that are not to augment their ability or resonate with them. So so first I kind of want to get into the decline of the academy, and Kelly and Rafi kind of went into a little bit about sort of the ills of contemporary academia, and I definitely can relate in part. We definitely have been noting that it's been succumbing to trends of over-specialization, of conceptual ossification, like increasingly, lectures and texts, and the discourse in general has just become very jargon-laden, and kind of, and there's also the commodification of knowledge, both seeing knowledge as something that is useful to like making money, basically treating higher education like glorified vocational school, which isn't necessarily a sling at actual hardworking people who go to vocational school, but or as a way to sort of like seek social status, which the first presentation went into. And I think this is kind of historically comparable to medieval scholasticism, because when it originally came from Europe, from the Islamic world, it was considered to be this vibrant intellectual movement that gave birth to the Gothic age, the great cathedrals, the universities, the theology of Thomas Aquinas. But as the centuries passed on, it just became increasingly ossified. There was really no real innovations. There was famously, they said, scholasticism started ending in hair-splitting disputes about how many angels could fit on a head of a needle. So that by the time the Renaissance came around, it was considered to kind of be this like dead end for many like intellectuals and scholars and thinkers of that period. So I think the question now becomes, how does philosophy be relevant in our contemporary age, in particular to groups that might find that our current learning environments for it are really inhospitable to it actually being cultivated and transmitted. So I want to we'll get to what my solution or proposal of what solutions that I have. but I want to kind of go over the two pillars of my framework, which is philosophy as practice and philosophy as a poke, or a poke as space, sorry, and how they will, and how they I think they complement each other, and how we can apply these two principles to the aesthetic realm and the intellectual realm. So I think one thing that we have to remember about philosophy is that until the early modern era, philosophy was a way of life. It wasn't just merely an eccentric scholarly pursuit, and it was something that you practiced. The word, there's a Greek word exthesis, which means practice or exercise. And that can include everything from like meditation to contemplating nature, to fasting, to reading text, to remembering through lists, or dialectical argumentation. The dialectical argumentation component will be very important later. So in some ways, theoretical or conceptual activity in philosophy was a type of practice. It wasn't like you weren't having, like, often you sometimes see these discussions about, you know, the sort of the more theoretic parts of philosophy. You know, they seem divorced from, like, you know, everyday practical concerns. But in fact, the intellectual exercises or thought experiments were part of the practice. I think that's something that's often forgotten. And I'm kind of getting this notion of philosophy as a way of life really from Pierre Hadot, who was a famous French historian of philosophy who wrote a book about that. And from the text, he sort of compares, you know, philosophy as being a set of practices that sort of that you utilize to sort of build up your capacity for thought and ultimately sort of transform yourself. And he writes, the notion of philosophical exercise has its roots in the ideal of athleticism and the habitual practice of physical culture typical of the gymnasia. Just as the athlete gave new strength and form to his body by means of repeated bodily exercises, so the philosopher developed his strength of soul by means of philosophical exercise and transformed himself. So in some ways, philosophy is what, you know, physical culture is to the body, and you have to practice that to sort of improve your soul. And so the second part is space as a poke. And a poke, this comes from Husserlian phenomenology, which means that you sort of bracket the concerns that present themselves to everyday consciousness. So you reduce the things that appear to consciousness and try to reacquaint yourselves to the object realities behind our intentionalities. So trying to remove presuppositions or that have sedimented over time and just try to understand things as they appear to us. And writing about, and so I'm kind of drawing on the work of a contemporary German philosopher, Sloterdijk, and one of his interpreters, Adam Roberts, here, where he describes the original Platonic Academy as the architectural equivalent of what Husserl called apostrophizer of poke, a building for shutting out the world and bracketing concerns, and asylum for mysterious guests that we call ideas and theorems. In today's parlance, we would call it a retreat or a hideaway. And this is where I think space as a poke and philosophy of practice kind of come together. So, because you need the institutional space, literally, you know, to be able to perform these types of practices, of being able to perceive and transform our perception and ultimately transform our mode of being in the world. So the extended activity of the mind in this way takes its condition of possibility in a whole media ecology of material affordance spaces, sets of architectural poke that complement and enable the individual capacity to perform certain maneuvers of thought, maneuvers that make it apparent that the material conditions of possibilities required for the bios theoreticos, life of contemplation. And that's bios theoreticos as like the end goal of, let's say, a philosophical practice. Is something you need to actually figure out the types of exercises and the gymnasium, for lack of a better word, that you would be able to practice these types of disciplines in. So let me just kind of bring it. So these are the two principles that I want us to kind of keep in mind. So kind of as a starter, a little bit about myself. I am on the spectrum, and you know, I went through 4-year school. I kind of came away with certain insights about those types of intellectual environments and what works and what doesn't. And long story short, I had a former colleague of mine who currently works at the Institute of Contemporary Art at the University of Pennsylvania, and she knew that I had disability, and so she asked me to kind of do this like pro bono consulting work to make the ICA more perceptually inclusive for people with disabilities like myself. And also I've been in sort of talking a little bit with a professor he's at George Washington University now, but used to be at Temple, and he's also been focused on building accessibility through sensory and social interventions. And I've learned a lot from him. And so I kind of gave a lot of recommendations on how to make their space more inclusive, and I'll kind of go over those a little bit. But one thing that kind of struck me as I was consulting was that you constantly have these metaphors of making spaces acceptable, or in the parlance of political science, negative rights, like freedom from certain things, like freedom from distraction, freedom from in a negative sense, and subtracting things rather than positive. I'll get to what positive liberty is, and limitations. And I want to kind of move. So basically, all those metaphors are kind of talking about, a question of making things accessible, more open, freedom from distraction, or talking about limitations. And I want to move from metaphors of those of empowerment, positive rights. And by positive rights, I mean not freedom from something, but freedom to achieve a certain state of consciousness or being, or an augmentation. And by promoting the idea of conceptualizing museums and art galleries or classrooms as kind of mental gymnasiums where we're working out our muscles or doing cardio, we're flexing, developing our organs of perception and cognition. So I kind of saw, so as I continued to work with the ICA, I kind of almost saw that as a pilot program for which suggests a novel approach to teaching philosophy outside the academy, by reintroducing it as an intellectual way of life that culminates in a transformative theoria or contemplation in a particular media environment with particular practices. And I'll kind of go over what that entails. But first, and so I want to kind of clarify that this two-pronged approach of practice and space can apply both to the aesthetic realm of experiencing the aesthetic mode of apprehending the world, which is perceptual or sensible, and then also the cognitive way of understanding the world, which is more discursive and intellectual. And so this is just like a way to sort of divide the territory. So the sensible, are art galleries, theaters. The disciplines would include training for staff, social stories, which is basically for people with, it's basically a way to tell the guests, what they should expect, and kind of walk them through going through the museum in the form of a narrative, which might be more easier for them to understand. Artifacts are things like sensory toolkits that I'll get a little bit into, and how they're kind of like almost like prosthetic limbs to enable people to experience these galleries and in these installations in an equitable way, and also creating spaces that people can emotionally decompress, because they might not be bombarded by a lot of sensory information, and it might kind of overwhelm them. So I'll kind of go over all the basics with making spaces more perceptually inclusive and empowering for people with disabilities, and how we can apply similar principles to teaching philosophy. So gymnasiums of a thesis, that's basically what I think we ought to have, how we ought to reimagine museums and art spaces. And so ways to kind of create accessibility, you can do very simple things like just modify, like spatially modify the actual building, so you can allow for people with like wheelchairs or crutches by installing a ramp or an elevator, as you can see here. And then there are things, I think, within the actual museum, which is a way that kind of, let's say, modulate the intensity of the content. So I want to kind of distinguish between hot and cold sensory environments. So hot spaces are ones with a lot of excess sound, light, movement, and other sensory information. And for people, with ASD and probably other disabilities, these can be really overwhelming, emotionally, sensorially, and sometimes, and I think that to complement these kinds of hot spaces where they're receiving a lot of bombardment of content, you need cold spaces, more quiet, less stimulation, calming stimuli like plants or cushions. Actually, this photo on your right-hand side, at least my right-hand side, was actually taken at the ICA, and I told the folks there, this actually is a good example of like a cold space, because at the ICA there are a lot of installations that go over like that often involve light or not just have involve light or sound, which some viewers might find disturbing, but it's also like very intense content, content about racism or misogyny or police violence that some people might find very upsetting. And you might need spaces, not just for like people with like developmental disabilities, but just regular folks or normies, basically, a space to kind of just, to decompress and kind of soak in the information that they've been receiving. So there we go. And so one thing that you see in some museums, a lot more of them are doing this, is they have these things called sensory toolkits. And these are for people who suffer from sensory overload. And they're usually these, usually are these little drawers or backpacks that have things like fidget spinners or silly putty or headphones that the guest uses, that the guest is able to use. It allows them to kind of, process maybe their stress or anxiety, or sort of modulate their intake of the exhibits. And I kind of have thought of these kinds of media artifacts as basically perceptual prosthetics, in the same way that you have the sprinter who has the prosthetic leg. It enables him to participate in athletic culture by giving him through this particular object. And I think in a similar way, you are allowing people with developmental disabilities an ability to participate in aesthetic culture by giving them a kind of augmented tool that allows them to experience things equitably. So far, I have everybody? Okay. So what can philosophical pedagogy learn from this approach? And so I want to just reiterate that I have not actually had the privilege of actually being able to implement any of these proposals in a classroom, but I would definitely be very interested in maybe doing like a pilot program. So one thing that I talked a little bit about like media ecology, and I think I just want in art museums, and by media ecology I kind of mean I kind of mean like a McLuhan-esque sense, like we fundamentally understand the world through the mediums of painting, of the written word, of sound, recording. And ultimately, we should think of all spaces as kinds of media ecologies, and it allows us a kind of a repertoire of tools that we use to help us understand to help us navigate and process information. And I think, and I don't know if any of you have had have had to teach in these types of environments, but increasingly a lot of, at least K through 12 schools are increasingly dominated by screens, by like open concept classrooms that often have a see-through, have like see-through glass, and how in some ways this very media ecology of screen use, of lots of windows and open spaces, how this ultimately kind of creates a learning environment that might be conducive to some kinds of learning, that might work well for some people, but might really be disadvantageous for others. And and the sort of show what I'm talking about. This is a clip from The Simpsons. It was this is episode set in the future, where at the school, the class size is like 200 people, and there's a single instructor who's instructing like multiple classes across the United States, and it's sponsored by Pepsi. It's kind of a somewhat dystopian look at sort of the neoliberalization of education. And this is I actually came up with this idea before Zoom, but we've been reading a lot of articles about how Zooming classes for high school students or people enrolled in colleges, how it's been very much affecting how their learning habits, and how some people find it like much more difficult. And so, and I can attest to, I can attest to this, but my brothers, both of them are enrolled in colleges at the moment, and they've been telling me that, that their learning through Zoom has been very difficult for them, and it's very much sort of disrupted their rhythm of understanding. So, and so in some sense, Zoom, so our increasing reliance on screens can, in some ways it can be an asset, but in some ways it can also make it difficult for us to process information and learn in a really congenial way. So, and I think a worry about how media ecologies can fundamentally affect how we process information, I think was actually really articulated, by Plato and the Phaedrus. It was written sometime in the 4th century BC, and he warned, and he's speaking here, and he wrote more about the written word, treatises or textbooks that were being in use in his time period, and how he argued that the written text could be an impediment to actual philosophical understanding, because what is a text but kind of like a monologue written by a single author? And unlike speaking to a person, you can't ask a text a question and it will just it'll actually answer it or clarify a certain point. It's just a one-directional sort of slog that the reader just sort of receives, rather than a sort of dialogical sort of back and forth between two people trying to come to common understanding. So whether it's the written word, whether it's screens, I think different kinds of media technologies and certain kinds of ways and practices with those media ecologies really affect how we learn. And they can both help illuminate our understanding, or it can help obscure our understanding. And so, so I'm not necessarily saying that, screens are bad or books are bad. I think what we have to sort of think about rather is how do we create the spaces and the practices, the spaces with the media spaces and the practices associated with those spaces that allow for a true jamming, a kind of a synergy between participant and environment. So I think the way to kind of get that kind of jam, that kind of that reciprocal jive, for lack of a better word, active in learning about philosophy, is to kind of treat the classroom as a space for the practice of discursive dialogue. So this could be reading text, it could be memorization, it could be note-taking, or working with other audiovisual technology, media techniques that can help amplify understanding, that would ultimately be used by a pedagogical interlocutor who interrogates the students in a back and forth process. As you see with the image on the screen, there's a person pointing to a text, and then you have the instructor kind of interrogating him. It's like, what do you mean by that? What does the text say? What are these words that you are receiving from a long dead author? And actually forcing the student to kind of engage with the words and hope with the words and with the text, and kind of not just only be forced to ask questions, but also pose his or her own questions to the text, which I think often is the missing component, of the Socratic method. It's not just, the the teacher interrogating the student, it's also the student learning to ask questions and learning to be their own weaver of a dialectical or dialogical process of understanding. And so whether we are using a learning environment of books or screens, we are merely having tools at our disposal that are not sufficient to install the intellectual discipline required for a psychagogy, or turning of the self to a new form of life. So, and you've also seen, in a lot of therapy, increasing reliance on things like behavioral cognitive therapy or dialectical therapy of of being able to have this back and forth process that allows the patient to be able to process information in a different way. So just to sort of conclude, for facilitators of artistic and intellectual spaces, I don't think we should think of accessibility as the necessary but sufficient end to, let's say, working with people with disabilities, or just people who are just not finding that these spaces are welcoming for them. I think our end goal has to be the realization of personal capacity, and that can include sort of an awakening of aesthetic appreciation or deeper philosophical understanding. And I think that by sort of being mindful of what kind of spaces and what kind of practices we use in those spaces, we're kind of returning to the spirit of the Platonic Academy by creating a niche space that, through the complementary use of which has a complementary use of controlled medium environment and a curriculum of practices that go with that. So whether we're trying to cultivate a life of bios theoreticos, philosophical life, or a bios aestheticos, aesthetic life, we kind of need an enclave as a foundational act that allows us to, we kind of come back to that word of poke, this kind of idea of bracketing the world outside of us and kind of focusing, kind of removing our presuppositions, kind of entering a space that we are able to sort of conserve our attention and reorient it towards the different forms of media, and help us engage with those forms of media in a more conscious way, and through this conscious reorientation of attention, we can reorient our own selves toward the cultivation of self, and hopefully on a more macroscopic scale toward the cultivation, of our whole self of our larger world. So that was my presentation. Let me just see if I can get to Okay. So that was my presentation. I could.
Yay!
I think I was under 30 minutes, give or take.
Yeah, we're relaxed. We're relaxed here. You're good.
Yeah, so I hope everyone found that everyone was able to keep with me. and I hope it was relatively clear. It's kind of hard presenting when I don't see any of your faces, but I just feel like I'm talking to like a blank wall or something. At least that. Does anyone have any questions? Critiques, compliments?
I have some of those compliments. I really enjoyed, and all of the above. No, I'm just kidding. I really enjoyed this, and I found in particular your opening salvo against university as it currently is really compelling. And I want to steal your beautiful phrases. Conceptual ossification, in particular, I think is just such a great little stinging little phrase. I love it.
Yeah.
On the one hand, we get this, I think, really wonderful and appealing conception of the ideal classroom from you as the space where we can be in dialogue. On the other hand, you've done this great work. Thank you for talking to the ICA and for working in the museum space and thinking about how we can make museums more powerful and educational. And you've been able to draw on your really rich understanding of the history of European thought to do so, which is just great. I mean, how many people are able to be so scholarly and to bring those ideas to a space that can actually at least write them down? One hopes implement them. So thank you for that work. And I have so many questions for you about museums.
Right.
I find museums really puzzling. I don't really always know what they're trying to do. And I guess maybe one way to distill my thoughts into a question would be, well, I think it would be a step up to start thinking of museums as a place where we can cultivate the bios aestheticos and practice aesthesis and sharpen our vision. That might still leave me feeling as though the museum is always just there, and it'll be the same when I leave. And it's I don't know what to say about it. It's hard to have a dialogue with a museum.
Right.
The art is there; it doesn't change. So, do you think there's a way to make a museum more genuinely more dialogical? In other words, to make the museum a much more profound place of learning, rather than what it is now, which is, I don't know what it is. It's not learning. It's like the illusion of learning, or it's about cultural capital, and I don't know what the museum is now. I don't mean to insult museums. I'm sure I'm wrong.
No.
How can we make museums more dialogical? That's my question.
Yeah. I would have a little experience with this because I actually work, before I got laid off, I worked as a greeter at the Franklin Institute. It was my other part-time job. And so I kind of got to see firsthand like what the education, how modern museums think of their educational mission. And at least in the case of the Franklin Institute, I think it was pretty well run for the most part. I think they were, they had live science demonstrations. They had, I think they were, they had, there was a constant, they had many people on staff to kind of communicate, the science communicators as well. They even encouraged us greeters to kind of memorize science facts. So I do think that, like, but I think, then again, the Franklin Institute's a children's science museum. It's not the same thing as, like, an art gallery necessarily. And I will say that, like, because I think the institution of museums or education or what, or really any interpersonal human artifact, is that there's such a plasticity historically of what a museum has been and what it could be. When the British Museum started, it was basically an imperial trophy room for all the places they conquered and colonized, all the artifacts they borrowed and whatnot. And then museums, and then obviously once Britain no longer became an empire, they had to sort of shift their museum's mission. And I think something similar, I hope, so I do agree with you that I think there are a lot of museum spaces that are not very dialogic. They're not really interested in engaging their audience, really providing education. I know the Barnes Museum originally started out that way, although I don't really know if they're actually practicing that in principle. But yeah, I definitely think there is room for museums to be more dialogical, have a more, I mean, one thing I didn't really add in my presentation is that although I treat the aesthetic and the intellectual as separate, perception and understanding as separate, I definitely think there is a reciprocal feedback between them. It's so I don't want to think that there's some very stark dualism between understanding the faculty of aesthetic appreciation, the faculty of intellectual appreciation. I think both of them can go together very well.
Oh, yeah. I have a different experience with museums, and maybe it's just because there's this very hidden treasure down in Richmond, the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and they had, it's not a very well known or popular museum, but they'll get these crazy big acts that come through. Edvard Munch came through a few years ago. I think they had Monet a while ago. But they always had hands-on activities for the kids. We went on field trips to the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts so many times, and I kind of am wondering now if a lot of the hands-on heuristics I'm about to talk about come from all of those activities that the museum put on. So I'm not familiar with what's going on in Philly or much of the bigger named museums, but maybe we can look to Virginia for a model for how to do things right. And have these hands-on activities that sort of teach you how to walk through the museum and how to have a discourse with the paintings that might not be commonsensical, I guess, or the first kind of, you definitely have to reorient yourself to yourself in order to receive the museum in a richer way. So maybe these museums can have those spaces that invite community events through, or you don't have to sign up with a school or a daycare or whatever. Just, hey, we're open to the public. Yeah. And we're going to have these crazy activities that'll get you thinking and might train a child, or have adult classes that'll teach you how to look at things right. I know that's a terrible way to put it, but.
Right. I mean, one museum I went to, I had a really great experience. It's not as well known. It's in New York. It's called the Rubin Art Museum, and it specializes in Himalayan Buddhist art in general. And we had a tour docent. We had a tour docent that kind of helped us navigate the museum, because I really don't know that much about Buddhist art. So even having tour guides or people who kind of can help you navigate those spaces and help you engage with the art pieces, I think was incredibly helpful. And if I'm thinking of a model of so the Rubin Museum is definitely something, at least in my experience, has was very much what I would want a museum, at least an art museum experience, would very much be like. But yeah, I mean, I do agree that at least the way Virginia has been trending, we should definitely look toward them for inspiration, considering that finally the northern suburbs are finally becoming demographically significant.
As someone from Richmond, I have to say Nova can go create its own state, but.
Now there's still those factional differences within Virginia. I don't want to put my hand in the hornet's nest.
No, you're fine. I kid. Okay. Well, any more thoughts and comments and things from anybody?
Really broadly speaking, I'm just so grateful that our 3 presentations thus far, have a beautiful relationship. Everything that each one of us has said has interwoven with something that somebody else has said, and we have accidentally just compounded upon each other's ideas. So that's not adding anything at all. I'm just very grateful.
We're all sort of drawing on Plato, I think.
Yeah. Philosophy is just footnotes to Plato. I mean, it's true.
Mhm.
Well, Nathan, I'm super excited for hopefully a budding relationship between you and the nonprofit. Eventually we want to create our own space, and I will take all the consulting I can get in terms of how to make that space conducive for reaching grand philosophical heights for everybody. So I
Right.
really appreciate
Since you're the philosopher queen, I don't want to dethrone you or anything. You know,
Rafi's already done it once.
Yeah, patriarchal, being the patriarchal.
Just had to have
be
a whirl on the throne.
Yeah. Can I just be the philosophical duke or something? You know.
Oh, we can all be philosopher queens here. I think there is enough space to go around. Everyone's got their own sovereign territory.
Okay.
However, the LCP method is the LCP method. God damn it. Yeah. Anyways, yes. I hope everyone feels like a queen so far. Yes.
Drag racing, but I'm open to it.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Nathan. That was wonderful. And thank you, Rafi and Amy, for your presentation so far. This has been so great. I'm very excited for this, and this is my dreams coming true. So thank you all for participating and sharing in this excitement. It means the world to me. So thank you so much. This is great. Okay. Without further ado, we shall go to myself, Kelly Birchfield of St. Joseph's University. I will be discussing lawn chair philosophy's hands-on heuristics for reaching and expressing transcendental structures of rational identity, worldview, and motivations. I do not have a handout or a PowerPoint. I'm one of those lazy philosophers. I'm going to just read to you. So I hope you enjoy my reading voice. It'll make up for a lack of visuals. There is something magical about participating in the Western philosophy canon. To do so is a dignifying act. Here I am, little old me, conversing with great minds over topics both sacred and ancient, and which reveal to me new dimensions of self, reality, and the structures which tie those dimensions together. Even if for but a brief moment as I read, I am transformed, along with my simple wisdom. I come out of such a baptismal event refreshed, excited, and better able to communicate my perspective, having then become intimately and infinitely familiar with it. Through exchanges with the canon, I am bequeathed more agency, more freedom, my brow anointed with the virtue of my own sweat, as it calls me to inspect myself in full, which is no easy task. But through its perpetual completion, through my own completion, that task rewards me with the right to represent myself, to represent my own little world, no matter how it appears, as something inexhaustibly valuable. By studying philosophy, I am empowered with effectual reach. I can touch my surroundings to the natural result of my say in their becoming. And I am better able to defend myself and my world from abuse with the rational orders I discover each time I study. So if you will allow me to make my personal maxims law, everyone should have access to the benefits of rigorous philosophy. Oh, here comes this word again. But the wealth of benefits philosophy holds sits out of reach for many people of just about any circumstance, but especially for underserved, underrepresented populations. No matter what era in academic history you inspect, philosophical texts are invariably demanding of their reader. Every intellectual circle has its own terminology and flow, yet participates in a larger tradition predicated upon a common sense and common human evidence. It takes time and patience to contemplatively reconcile the rational differences and similarities between the larger Western philosophical framework and its many moving parts. Even more so to reconcile your personal inner landscape with the many worlds the universe of philosophy entails. Even more so if your external world is busy with pressing matters. The work of coming to your own terms with the terminology is part of the Western regimen, the wonderful results of which marked the beginning of this essay. To put matters in plain terms without challenging the reader to explore the many dimensions of self and thought that the flow and language of each intellectual circle within the tradition offers, defeats such a purpose and obscures, even circumvents altogether the overall rational flow of the philosophical world creation, for which each circle may serve as an edifying example. But the intentional hurdles and obfuscating language of the Western canon are often too demanding for those of a lower socioeconomic status. You know, who cares about principles of pure practical reason and how they relate to reality when homelessness or the verge of homelessness or extreme financial work-related duress block the way. Reality is what pays the bills, while those same principles of pure practical reason could hold the answer for overcoming homelessness or financial duress. When someone is in the thick of life, Kant is unapproachable. The potential fruits of laboring the fields of your inner landscape alongside him, lost. How can philosophy honestly and successfully advertise itself as more work than is emotionally and practically manageable for those already burdened with the labors of poverty and trauma? As a philosophy teacher, I believe it is important to keep in mind the stresses of our most vulnerable populations while developing my pedagogy, whether that pedagogy informs my teaching within a university setting or a homeless shelter or, you know, through online platforms. By making rigorous philosophy more accessible to those whose reality is furthest removed from that of the privileged authors composing the bulk of the Western canon, I will not only encourage rational becoming and progress for those whose worlds are weighted with extraordinary concerns, I may also bring diverse perspectives to philosophy itself. As someone goes from philosophically exploring their many dimensions of self and reality to authentically expressing their original self-evidence in a way which points back to the greater philosophical conversation, they will have a stake in the perpetuation of the philosophical community. They will imbue the Western horizon with the worthy content of their own experience. They will have a say in how the tradition is handed down. They will leave a mark on the meaning and value of philosophical practice. And with diverse hands tending its foundations, philosophy will have the strength to survive in a world which has little time and patience for its word games. Additionally, by creating a teaching method which keeps in mind the needs of the vulnerable populations and then the needs of Western philosophical tradition, of the tradition itself, I believe, you know, we can catch those in between, in the middle, those who are not on the fringes of society, yet who might benefit from the self-understanding and mastery the rigorous philosophical tradition offers if they were only compelled to make the time to do the work. I believe this teaching method can help to make philosophy more popular without watering it down to fit asinine feel-good self-help models, which sell their dubious quick fix wares so well in our image-based consumer economy. And so this method is the hands-on heuristics that I will be, you know, championing throughout my life. I guess I've made this my life's work here. So this is at the beginning. I'm at my nascent level here. So these are, you know, this is not well researched. I mean, I've researched the history of philosophy, but, you know, again, I'm not a professional researcher either in terms of education. This is based on my own experience. And I'm hoping that in time, this will prove successful. So I believe that the transcendental tradition provides the best place to start in order to properly address the ends of my pedagogical concerns, specifically the phenomenological tradition, as it begins with Husserl's exposition of the temporal structures of consciousness and origins of rationality which condition worldview itself. and conditions communication, and measure upon the grounds of both private and universal evidence. According to Husserl, we each navigate the world through a personal perspectival lens built from our own experience. What allows us to build that horizon of sense is inner time consciousness, which represents the spontaneous, playful way we understand the basic patterns of our surroundings, ourselves, others, and the objective relationship we hold between ourselves, our surroundings, and others. Though we each possess a unique time signature, so to speak, because our patterns are established by the same type of broad intentional consciousness, we can come together to establish a common time signature, a community pattern, a tone, a rational pattern necessary to build a common language, express common evidence, and condition common sense. Phenomenology allows us to build a space most conducive for the exchange of each other's realities to the gain of our own personal and communal enrichment. It allows us to observe the concept of humanity as we embody it swiftly and efficiently as we begin our philosophical journey at the heart of all matters. We dive right into the deep end of the pool here, bringing to focus how it is individuals and communities create and preserve the reality of any tradition whatsoever, even the philosophical tradition. And Husserl inspires an approach to connecting the personal world to wider philosophical horizons, which does not discount or admonish a practitioner's natural way of valuing the world. To completely give up personal beliefs for the sake of philosophical discussion requires too much time in our society and is potentially damaging for vulnerable populations whose worldviews are belittled and attacked as it is. So Husserl honors the finite human perspective as that through which our world gains sense and value. He calls us to merely suspend our judgments based upon our natural beliefs about existence and reality in the world, in order to inspect our transcendental consciousness, the neutral forms of time consciousness, the universal structures common to us all, which condition sense, knowledge, and our ability to communicate. He encourages a firm, unbreakable bond between humanity throughout its many differences and a clear path for those who wish to witness self-evidence firsthand. However, Husserl's logical method proves challenging for leading practitioners to the river of inner time consciousness and authentic becoming. I believe in his phenomenology. I believe it provides the best beginnings for my own methodology, but demonstrating a path to actually achieving self-observation needs a hands-on direct approach, something which, mere reflection or absorbing philosophical material or practicing logic is going to allow. So there's, and this is because, we don't have as much time for that sort of reflection. And logic is often kind of off the wall. It doesn't come, it's supposed to allow us to test our beliefs about the world. However, its laws hardly resemble how action appears and takes place for us in real time. So to lead us beyond logic through logical terms is a hard sell. And there's not much time to decipher Husserl's unapproachable jargon, especially while comparing it to another author's unapproachable jargon, and while appealing to your own transcendental reflection. It's just too confusing. So I believe that art provides a better philosophical route to suspending one's natural assumptions far better than the purely logical reflection or philosophical debate does, as an original artwork provides original evidence of self-becoming. When one creates art, one leaves the marks of their own personal original evaluation of the world, which involves multiple layers of self-understanding simultaneously in communion with the artwork one creates. the subconscious, the imagination, the understanding, memory, emotion, etc., all united through the rhythms of the creative act, the performative act. And when one creates art, one is transposed into a realm not predicated upon need and money, allowing for one's realm of possibilities to lead the way in constituting this artifact. I broke my pen. Reality and art can be whatever you want it to be. And when you create art in response specifically to a philosophical question, you can explore why it is you created what you did in the manner in which you did, because your self-evidence is sitting there right before you. You capture your own subconscious in the act. You can observe yourself while you're not looking. You capture the transcendental process by which you come to know the world, and you create an artifact which can lead you back to the moment you created that artwork and more efficiently access the other self which you unlocked in this pure realm that art provides for you. Your higher self, your philosophical self, the self which isn't determined by need and money or whatever pitiful situation in which you find yourself. So hopefully these art projects which I've designed are refreshing and allow students to reflect upon how the pure self that they find in art and philosophical reflection, how that interacts with the natural self in everyday situations. And once they build a familiarity with this philosophical self, then they'll be able to more efficiently engage with the philosophical canon on their own terms. And I think that's super important to be able to engage in any philosophical conversation that you want to, and to paint an overall picture. It gives those conversations more meaning to know the history behind it. And I think it's ennobling and dignifying to think that you are, equal to the greats. You can create something too. So I think art provides a great avenue. So I want to talk about a couple of the projects that I've done so far with my students in the Moral Foundations class that I'm teaching at St. Joe's. I've used this method in the creation of the whole class itself. Caroline, you know this, there's a logic portion to the class. And I understand wanting to have a critical thinking aspect to a philosophy 101 class, but it's an odd fit for moral foundations. Like, we're studying logic. Okay, now we're going to talk about, morality. Beyond the fact that philosophers tend to present themselves in a logical way, and we're all about analyzing arguments, it just doesn't seem to fit. So I've through that challenge, I think, found a way to remind students and ourselves that logic too is an art. So we'll do those exercises every day to familiarize ourselves with just the basics of logic. And then whenever we get to philosophers who question logic, who questions its foundations, question where its authority and autonomy come from, we work on art projects instead. We won't do a logic warm-up. We'll talk about the ideal world and the real world and how they interact. So after we get to Kant and talking about how the pure practical reason allows us to formulate an ideal world of how we believe things ought to be, and through his categorical imperative, trains the will to, through its judgment, interact with the world as it phenomenally appears. We can question, we can explore our own faculties of reason through this art project after the logical discussion. So I'll have students draw the real world without drawing, an actual globe. And then in the next assignment, draw the ideal world. Next, draw them in a fight. And the next way, draw them in harmony. And it allows students to see this very abstract, convoluted, unapproachable topic of Kant in a very concrete, personal way, to test to see if Kant is right. Well, do we have this practical reason? Whenever I tried to engage it, this artwork is what what emerged. So let's inspect this thing right before me. And I think it engages interest. You know, it's an artwork that the students have created themselves. And I'm asking them, what do you believe the ideal world looks like, and how does it interact with the real world? Does it match up to Kant? And what can we learn of the ideals of logic and how it is we're subsumed by them whenever we get beyond the constraints of that philosophical approach. I also have done, this is something I've done both in the university classroom and in the homeless shelter. It's the rhythms exercises. Play your internal rhythms. I'll divide the class or the room in two. This side will go 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and this side of the room will go triplet, 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 and then we'll get I'll have them play at the same time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and triplet, 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 and you hear that hiccup, and it's supposed to represent how it is that we all are oriented in this world through our own time signature. We prioritize, rationalize, unify ourselves and all of our perceptual modes in immediacy rhythmically. And, you know, if we can get in touch with how it is our very rational capacities emerge, then we can, you know, integrate those into a common space, create a common emotional space or rational space, maybe not a physical space. That space is created for us in the university or the shelter or wherever. But then I'll have each person go around and play their own inner rhythms. And we'll, as a group, either match those rhythms or create a polyrhythm off of them and go around the room and explore those. And we'll have each person reflect on how it is their personal worldview arises from that rhythm. What are your downbeats? What do you believe is most important in life? How does your belief in what is important determine your actions? Can we change our downbeats? How do we integrate varying downbeats as a group? And then we'll go back and do the first exercise again. And what usually starts as a mess and people unable to integrate those, it sounds really clean, as if everyone has been practicing with a metronome when we go back and do that again. So, you know, as far as evaluating whether, or just how effective that is, you know, this is still new. I'm not sure, but the fact that that students can come back and do the initial exercise better at the end of it, I hope is some sort of indication of its value. So those are a few of the projects that I've worked on, and I'm calling it hands-on heuristics, and I'm hoping to codify that more, and you know, make it easier for other teachers to replicate or to improve upon, pardon me, and do with it what they will. So that is what I have for you today. That's the end of my presentation. Yay! Any questions or comments? And we're running out. Well, we can run over a little bit.
I was just going to say that, like, your articulation of the LSCP's like maxims or principles is, you know, really, really well done. You know, I think many of us, myself included, had inklings of what you've said, but we've never been, at least I've never been able to as eloquently express them as you have. So I congratulate you. Thank you. One thing that I thought was interesting, you know, is this the recognition of rhythm as a mode of understanding, or not just a mode, but the mode of understanding. And it's just interesting because, like, most people, like, things where you use his heuristics, you know, like rule of thumbs for the people to pick up on these types of things. And the thing is, like, I think people, non-philosophical folks, can pick up on the rules of rationality. You know, they just don't understand it in like a formalized way, in the way philosophers do, you know? So it's like, I think, you know, again, it goes back to the very idea that, like, of the very even whether it's early man or just animals, like there seems to be an understanding of the world as like pattern and rhythm. It's not understood with like, syllogisms or like, or Euclid, but people grasp it, but they just grasp it in different ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And going back to Wheelhouse, it's what I know. I'm a drummer. And my nickname is Animal, and part of it of being Animal for the nonprofit as a character and some of its less formalized events, I hope taps into those other more subconscious, more animalistic, more immediate, visceral ways that we connect with each other, and to show how it is we can together reach the heights of that abstract thought without doing injustice to that original animalistic, way of being in the world. So yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in Nathan's mouth, but I think he and I would both agree that there is a beautiful universal design in the fact that you're taking so many different modalities to access the same experience, so that as many people as possible are able to engage as humanly as possible with the concepts that you're trying to, like, it's just fantastic. So
Yes, definitely.
yeah, the more modalities, the better.
And I'm picking up on this wave that's already present in the university, and people who are upset with the university system and want to rebel and do things differently, of being inclusive and looking at feminism as a way of making an equal space for everybody and bringing other viewpoints to philosophy. So I hope that, with my own specific LCP stuff can connect with all of those other worldviews and really capitalize on that movement. That sounds so terrible. Speaking of capital, but if we are in a capitalistic society, might as well use the means available to us to maybe reverse some of the ill effects of it. And so, I appreciate your appreciation, and I hope that we can, through this, point the way back to other perspectives who are also doing good work, and that we can just be as transparent as possible to make this movement as big as possible. Not just for myself and my own gain, although that would be great. But I hope that this is a continuation of what's already there. And I appreciate all of you in your spirit and joining me in this crusade of wisdom and knowledge and higher, nicer things. Yeah.
Kelly, I've got a question. I really am inspired by your vision, and it seems like one part of what you want to do is to enable people of all backgrounds, including some of the most marginalized people, to make contact with the canon. And I think this is really critical to what you're doing. And part of your argument for it is that it's ennobling to see oneself as being capable of dining at the great table. Is there also room for philosophy that actually comes out of the homeless community? In asking this question, I'm motivated by my students who often feel that the canon does not represent them, and they say, I don't see myself in the curriculum. And in some of my moods, I think, be capacious and embrace things from other perspectives. But but then I remember how important it was for me to see myself in the curriculum, and it was very easy for me to do so. But it was relevant to me when I was beginning my philosophy studies. I remember seeing young philosophers who were assigned on our syllabuses, and I thought, gosh, this person, I could relate to this person, and it made philosophy seem like I could contribute to. So that's my way into this reaction, the reaction of I want to see myself in this curriculum. Do you think that's important? And if so, is there a way to make room for that? Is there such a thing as, I'm so ignorant here, is this just such a thing as philosophy written by presently or recently homeless folks, or more broadly theory written by folks who are either presently or recently in that position. And is that relevant to your project?
Oh yes, very much so. I think it's very important. That's part of the cause, and I guess it does kind of get lost in this discussion of the canon. Um, you know, with the hands-on heuristics that's done at the shelters, you know, I don't even mention the canon. I'll mention words that are common to most philosophical discussions within that canon, but I'm hoping that they'll find that within themselves. And part of what I'll ask of my participants or students while we're creating art, the art project or engaging in these questions, is, you know, if we are dealing with someone from the canon or with the viewpoint that I am presenting, do you see that with yourself? Let's play our inner rhythms. How are those inner rhythms emerging for you? I'm saying they're emerging in a rational way, in a way that combined sense and pure essences, such that, you know, we can bridge a gap between the abstract and the concrete. But is that true for you? You know, explain to me how it is you are encountering rationality. Explain to me how it is your worldview arises from those rhythms, or how it doesn't. Am I wrong? You know, like, so I think it's very important to impress upon this message, you know, yes, this ennobling act doesn't come from the canon itself. It becomes ennobling when you can be one with that canon. It's like, I don't see myself in you, you nasty old perverted white man. Here's my philosophy. It speaks to me. I can do it just as well as you. And I can spit your terms back in your face and use them alongside my own terms. So I should definitely bring that out more. So thank you for asking that question. Yes.
When you go into the shelter, I mean, what I'm imagining is an intellectually extremely heterogeneous population, you know, because there must be some people who end up there from all kinds of walks of life. Maybe some of them have, you know, serious education. I don't know. Is that something you find, or like how do you? It seems like you must face a version of the problem that we all face to some degree, which is simply that our classrooms have people of so many different levels. Is that true? And how do you address that?
Definitely so. And I think the art exercises allow us to sort of bridge those intellectual differences, and we're getting in touch with our transcendental structures, which are common to everybody, no matter your background or influence or level of study. So like Nathan had said, you know, everyone gets rhythm. So even though I'll throw in these terms that are highfalutin, even those who are illiterate can get down with the message and participate and throw their own terms into the mix. So I think that the art project aspect of it allows us to involve as many people as possible, because it doesn't matter what your intellectual level is. Everybody gets down with art, and to be able to point those themes out in something that we can all do will, you know, uplift those who, you know, aren't as maybe educated as the person sitting next to them, but they can still have an intellectual conversation with them.
Yeah, there's a way into that.
Yeah,
it's cool. That's really cool.
yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
I can see that rhythm could be universal, that you could find some way to relate or to bring rhythm out. But drawing, I don't see that as being universal. I think that many people are truly terrified of drawing and can't even imagine. I can't imagine what your students, I mean, I can imagine a couple of them being able to do it, and then a lot of them having absolutely no idea what to do. So what do they actually draw?
Oh, I get all sorts of stuff. Um, there's a final art project at the end of the school year, and I'll use Plato's divine method. You know, where you have an object of inquiry, and that object of inquiry is any theme that we have discussed in class, and you break that down into its two most fundamental and opposing parts. You'll do a little write-up on the theme and why you believe those fundamental parts are indeed the fundamental parts. But beyond that, the write-up just explains how the artwork captures the interplay of those two fundamental parts. And in that way, all the evaluation goes to the write-up. I tell them, you can just draw a line on a piece of paper, say that it's modern art, as long as you can explain how what it is that you drew represents the interplay of these ideas, how they come together to create one conversation, and how it can be broken down. Explain the rationality behind it. So in that way, even those who are really bad at art can still participate. Yeah, so I try to be warm and let people know I'm not judging you on how well you draw. Just whatever pops up is meaningful, and I think by showing how these highfalutin ideas can sit just beneath a line on a piece of paper is kind of ennobling as well. Like, hey, I can't draw, but I can convey this masterpiece of intellect through whatever it is I did on the page. So I'll get stick figures sometimes, but every once in a while I'll get some kooky off the wall stuff. So yeah.
Sounds good.
Yay.
It's so funny that you said that, because I was like, I have since, what did I take? I think it was AP Algebra 2, maybe? I can't remember. But we talked about, in high school, we talked about the different things that it's socially and culturally appropriate to claim no knowledge of. How people say that they say very flippantly, I can't do math and I can't figure out the tip on this bill, or I don't have any rhythm, or I can't sing, or I can't draw. And so I imagine that because you offer so many different modalities, that the playing field gets leveled multiple times over, and that somebody's going to find a way in at some point. Is that fair to say?
I think so, and I hope so. I hope that's the intended goal. And I, it's funny that, this art project, oftentimes I'll have them write a paper as well, because I feel like that's what I'm supposed to be doing as a university professor. You must learn how to write a philosophy paper. But those that struggle with formulating their thoughts logically can sometimes do so well on the art project. And they demonstrate an amazing mastery over the material, and talked about how they were grateful to have that experience because their paper was trash, and it might have been. But as much as I think there is a lot to be said for philosophical papers, it's hard to evaluate a student's mastery over the material because, they can just so easily copy and paste or paraphrase and use quotes, and there, boom, you have a paper. But to get them actually engaged, yet in a way where, I'm not going to judge you on your artwork, just your thought, I think, opens people up more to the field, whereas papers are really scary and based on a logic which has dubious origins anyways, but it's the main theme, so I hope that it levels the playing field. It seems to, and I hope, 10 years down the line, I can report back to you with more concrete results as to, yes, it is more inclusive. Hello, David.
Hey.
How's it going? Looking good on the beach there, nice and tan. Yeah.
Kensington Beach, yeah. I was at a place without Wi-Fi, so.
Oh.
but I'm just happy to hear whatever is left. So it's good to hear you, Kel.
Okay, well, we're done. Goodbye. No. Eh. Oh, well, any thoughts that you have, David, on inclusivity and the issues that philosophy, how it is usually practiced, might pose for someone who's on the outside, who might
Well,
struggle with
I've obviously, having missed everything, I was curious to hear what you were going to say about Socratic approaches, or things that demand dialogic interaction and let people bring their personal experience in any way that they can, and then being fed back about what enlightenment that brings to other people. And then I just think there's a channel, but I like what you were saying about paper writing being a challenge. Anyway.
Well, Rafi and Nathan both brought up the Socratic method specifically. So I think if you two have more to say on it's...
David, you missed it, but my grandmother would always ask me to can I just perform the play for her? So I'll just do my whole talk. So okay, we get into it. It sounded like we actually, it seemed like Emma, Nathan, and I, and we all seemed to coalesce around a kind of Platonic approach in some way or other. For Emma, it was about using music to help develop the emotional capacities of young kids. Nathan and I were both talking about the need to create dialogue in educational spaces, be they museums or the typical college classroom. So really, it's almost as though you've been here the whole time.
Well, when you're talking about using music, are you talking about like rhythmic dialogues, using percussion and things like that as a kind of auxiliary, or?
I am actually an elementary music teacher, so so the music goals are the primary ones, but I am constantly looking for ways to teach the whole child as I am meeting my musical goals. So quite the other way around.
Well, that's the way I interact with my grandson. We Zoom and we drum, and it's like totally, yeah.
Yeah.
You feel the developmental work, you know what I mean? It's like, oh, I can challenge you, or I can like respond to you, and I appreciate you. You get all kind, or I can balance you, or I can imbalance you. It's like,
Yeah.
it's great. Yeah.
Call and response drumming is actually like one of the ways we can engage in like nonverbal communication with students who are not able to communicate verbally. So yeah, right on.
And Kelly, in Philadelphia, there's a specialist in treating severe neurological disorders with music. So I can introduce you to her, and maybe use that. Yeah, I mean, I know you're big on the music section, and she's
I'll forward it.
Works on this internationally. I'll bring her to you. Okay.
Yeah. Please do.
I'm also interested in educating older people. See this? We like to talk. So I'm also into the talking side of it too. So anyway.
Well, speaking of older people, we talked about, at these early developmental ages, we're sort of in this free space, but as we grow older, we've got our hierarchy of concepts, which, are necessary to establish our worldview and navigate our surroundings, but, can also limit us in many ways. So in what ways do you think we can be philosophers and, as Emma said, poke through the holes in those concepts, not in a way that's so terribly destructive, but in a useful way? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when I've gotten the guts to lead sessions and present ideas that I thought, oh, I finally got something to say, and then realize that what I thought was so coherent is, just a garble as I present it to people, why don't you see this? Why isn't it, huh? That gives me a lot back. I don't know that the other people appreciate as much. So, but that's a lot of work. Presenting to me is a huge effort. And on the other hand, when I go to someone else's presentation, which I seek them out. And like tomorrow there's one, and the next day there's one. I try to engage with the questions that it raises for me. I don't know. It's just a constant. But I don't know that I'm breaking out of any paradigms, Kel. I really don't know. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes it feels great. Maybe that's a sign of growth. I don't know. I don't know. So this is, how do you intuitively measure that? I don't know. I'll have to think. I wish I heard what other people said, because I now feel like I'm trying to lead you through a desert. I don't know where I'm going. A vast desert.
I think something common to all of our presentations was specifically the difficulty of measuring the results of our pedagogy and our heuristics. You know, are we reaching the children? Are we reaching these young adults, these people? You know, maybe we're making them feel good about themselves, or making them feel really bad through rigor.
Well, there are two things. I mean, if I'm getting answers back that sound to me like, that's the paradigm I'm bringing.
Yeah.
Or if I'm getting a lot of resistance, both of those I like. And I guess I'm making progress either way. Are those the only two ways to measure progress? Because they're the only two that I seem to have. You know?
Yeah.
Creating conflict or creating harmony. Is there another? I don't know.
Way up and the way down are the same path.
Yeah. So 2 Hegel meetings coming up in the next 2 days. I'm sure it's going to be mind-boggling. Looking forward to it.
Hegel meetings.
Yeah.
I don't know about Hegel meetings.
Well, there's a Seattle Philosophy Club, which is discussing, and then there's a Philadelphia group, which also is tuning in onto some Hegel topics. So there's some readings for it from the encyclopedia. I never heard of this, Encyclopedia of Phenomenology, not the Phenomenology of Mind. So we'll see. Someone seems to have something to say.
Yeah. I
How about
expect
giving each other resources or things like that. You know, maybe on your site, have a little place. Hey, this looks interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's great. Oh, great. You know, we should have a little news corner.
Yeah.
I mean, we have one for ourselves, but for the greater philosophical community, that might be helpful.
There you go.
Especially if we're pointing beyond ourselves.
With age appropriate. I think this is for the over 5-year-old group.
Kelly, I want to mention something. You know, I've been listening with great interest to the talks that I did here, and sorry about missing Rafi. And I heard the tail end of Emma's. You know, I don't know exactly how I fit in here. I teach philosophy probably in a more traditional way, or, you know, what I think of as a basically traditional way. But the most engagement I think I achieve is when I show a video and we all watch the same thing together and then talk. And there's some amazing stuff that we can watch together. I teach a course at Curtis Institute of Music, and right now the course is the philosophy of time and time travel. And I just showed a movie, a very short movie called La Jetée, made in 1962. It's French, by a director named Chris Marker. And it's extraordinary. It's all done in still images. So there we're engaging with art, but it's a way that we're engaging in that we're all watching. I showed it on Zoom through, you know, which worked fine. That's, I think, my most successful way of engaging with the class. And then whatever it is we're watching together, people then, you know, nobody's been left out. And even if they're behind in the reading, it encourages expressing, you know, what was your impression? What did you take away? What was your favorite part? I mean, there's just so many ways to engage. So, I mean, I think I've had more success teaching philosophy with that than any other way.
So, Carolyn, is
Right.
there if Kelly does set up a way for us to share resources, can you put some of those links up? That sounds really interesting.
It's a wonderful movie. Yeah.
That sounds great.
You know, so we've got the group email. Maybe we can have a Google Drive with shared stuff in it. From this, I can, oh, Nathan, I can put up your notes. So I'll put that up in there and then we can all add to it. Just letting you know, your fearless leader has very many faults. I have no idea how to set up a Google Drive. Does anybody, can anybody volunteer to do that? Oh, thank you, Rafi. Thank you. Thank you. My knight in shining armor. All right, so yes, we'll do that. We'll set up the Google Drive, share our resources. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be great and efficient.
Okay. I think I have to take off. So thank you, everybody. And this was very interesting. Thank you,
Good.
Kelly, for persevering with your vision.
Thank
I'm
you.
always happy to see it going forward. All right.
Thank
So
you, Caroline.
yeah. Okay. I'll look forward to whatever happens next.
Lasso Fest. This is coming next week
Yeah.
on Saturday.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Yes. Oh. Oh, you're muted, David. Or maybe you meant to be. I don't know. Okay. Ah. Well, are there any other thoughts, questions, comments, anything? Everybody feeling good?
I feel like I
Yeah.
learned a lot tonight, and just I thank you all so much for that. I mean, I've had my mind bent and twisted and turned in all kinds of ways, which I just really appreciate, and I really need it actually, because I have a lot less stimulation these days. It's terrible.
Yes.
My dreams are getting totally out of control. I think it's a function of that. I don't know if you're experiencing this as well, but like the vivid dreams.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
I have some effed up dreams that have been happening recently. I'll tell you outside of the Zoom video.
I woke up. My wife woke me up, and I said, "Thank you for waking me up," because I was in the middle of an incredibly stressful dream where like our apartment had been lifted into the air by an airplane, and it's just terrible. Anyway, suffice it to say that this has been much better, the opposite of that dream, and much more enlivening things for me to imagine and contemplate. Kelly's vision, and Emma's vision and Nathan's vision are just really, really interesting and pulling me in different directions. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah, it's this entire night has been really edifying, and I'm really thankful for all the contributors. And it's just been sort of miraculous that all the pieces just arranged so harmoniously. And I think it's really there's really a whole work of art. There's a German word, Gesamtkunst.
It's a Gesamtkunstwerk.
Gesamtkunstwerk. Exactly.
I'm overwhelmed emotionally by the harmony.
Yeah.
The harmony, and yet it's a Hegelian composite of harmony and, as David suggested, and also, was it conflict and harmony together, but not really. All these things fit together, and yet are also variegated and many forms.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the ring cycle in Zoom yet, but
we outdid Wagner.
We have to go for another 24 hours if it's going to be the ring cycle.
Yeah.
No, I've got a D&D game to go to.
Honestly, better than Wagner in my opinion, but
For sure. Yeah.
Yes. Look at us.
Looking forward to the full release. I'm glad you recorded this, right?
Yes.
Thank you so much for that, since now I get to look at it. Thank you.
Yeah, we are on display for the world.
Thank you.
Cool. Okay. Well, yes, thank you all. I really appreciate, again, your contributions. They're invaluable. And Nathan, you're right. This has just been a work of art, and I'm so glad that you saw it as such. So thank you all for creating with me, and for bringing, your passions to the table. That's exciting, and keeping me going. And Hope everyone stays safe and healthy during this ridiculous time right now.
Buonanotte, buonanotte.
Woo.
Thank you, Kelly. Take care.
Yeah.
See you.
Great, really great to meet, well, to see you again, David, and of course to see you again, Kelly, and to meet you, Nathan and Emma, and I hope we can stay in touch somehow. Kelly will, organize it, I'm sure, somehow.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, I'll have to meet in person.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I
when
live-
we're allowed to
I
talk to
live
other
in
people in
Philly.
person again.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Be very exciting.
Maybe
Yeah.
August. Maybe next August. Okay.
Oh my God.
We shall say.
Bye-bye.
And meanwhile, stay tuned for our Fest this coming Saturday. It starts at 3:30. It'll end around 11:30 unless we get other presenters. So you all, if you would like to present or participate in that, let me know. We still have some time slots available. Either way, it'll be fun. It'll be a great time.
Ciao.
Okay. Goodbye.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.